I've always liked camping. Not the kind with big groups and organized campsites, but the quiet kind, far from everyone, where all you hear at night is the wind through the trees and maybe the sound of an owl or a raccoon. I liked the peace of it, the way my brain quieted down when I was away from everything. I never thought I'd come to regret going out there alone. But one trip changed that. It was late September, right after a stretch of hard work. I'd finished a contract job early and decided to reward myself with a weekend in the woods. I picked a place I'd been before, somewhere in northern Idaho, about a 2-hour drive off the highway, then another 2 hours hiking in. It was remote but beautiful, with a hidden lake that didn't even have a name on the map. I'd found it years ago while exploring old logging roads and trails. Not many people went there. That was part of the appeal. I packed light but smart tent, sleeping bag, a jet boil for boiling water, freeze-dried meals, a hatchet, bear spray, first aid kit, the usual. I brought a lightweight rifle too. Not because I expected to use it, but it was bear country, and I'd rather carry the weight than take a chance. I left early Friday morning, drove out past the last little gas station, then followed dirt roads until I got to the old turnout I'd used before. The sky was that sharp autumn blue, the air already getting crisp. I locked my truck, put on my pack, and started hiking. The trail wasn't marked. It wound through pine forest, up and down small ridges, then finally dropped into a basin where the lake sat. It was a peaceful hike. I didn't see another soul on the way in. That's how I liked it. I reached the lake by early afternoon. It was exactly how I remembered it. Clear water, dark with pine reflection, ringed by rock and brush. I found a spot I'd used before, slightly elevated, with a good view of the water and some natural cover from the wind. I set up my tent, collected firewood, and boiled water for a meal. The sun dropped fast behind the ridge, and the air turned cold quickly. I bundled up in a fleece jacket and sat by the fire, staring into the flames as the stars started to come out. That first night was uneventful. Cold, quiet, peaceful. I heard something walk near my tent around 2 a.m., but it was probably a deer. The footsteps were light, nothing strange. I rolled over and went back to sleep. The next morning, I woke up early, made some instant coffee, and went to the lake to fish. I'd brought a small rod and a collapsible stool, and I sat by the shore for hours, caught 2 small trout and let them go. Around noon, I hiked around the lake, looking for new spots, maybe a better campsite for next time. I didn't find one. On the far side of the lake, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. It was an old tarp, half buried in leaves and branches, maybe 50 feet from the water. I walked over and found what looked like a very old campsite. The tarp had holes in it like it had been there for years. Beneath it were some rusted cans, a crushed cooking pot, and a half-burned log. Looked like someone had camped there long ago and just left it. I didn't think much of it at the time. People sometimes do that. Come out here, set up camp, then disappear. Maybe someone got sick or scared off by animals. Maybe they just forgot the gear. Still, I made a mental note of it and moved on. That afternoon, I took a nap back at camp, then went looking for firewood. That's when I noticed something strange. It was subtle, but there were fresh boot prints in the mud near the creek a few hundred feet from my tent. I squatted down to look at them. They weren't mine. Too big, and the tread was different. My boots had a flat hiking tread, but these had a distinct heel and a rounded front, like work boots. I hadn't seen anyone out here. I hadn't heard anything, but someone had passed through this spot not long ago. The mud was still wet. I stood there for a while, listening. The forest was quiet. No birds, no rustling. I told myself it was probably a hunter. People come out here during hunting season. Maybe they were passing through, maybe scouting. Still, it made me uneasy. I went back to camp and made sure everything was where I'd left it. Nothing was touched. But from then on, I kept my rifle closer. That night was different. The wind picked up and I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those boot prints. Around midnight, I heard a noise. Not an animal noise. A metallic sound. Sharp, short, like a tin can being kicked. I sat up in my sleeping bag, holding my breath. Came again, farther off this time. I unzipped the tent just a little and peeked out. Darkness. Cold air. The fire was dead. I couldn't see anything, just vague shapes of trees against the sky. I stayed awake until almost 3 a.m., ears straining. I didn't hear anything else. Eventually, I drifted off, though not deeply. The next morning, I checked the area. There was a small path leading from the trail to the lake, and near that path I found something new. Another boot print. Deep, fresh. The heel dug in like someone had been standing still there, watching. It faced toward my camp. I packed up right then. Not everything, just enough for a long day hike. I wanted to find out if anyone else was nearby. I followed the trail back toward where I'd seen the old tarp the day before, thinking maybe someone was squatting there now. But when I got to the spot, the tarp was gone. Not just shifted or disturbed, gone. The rusted cans, the crushed pot, even the old fire log. All of it, like it had never been there. I walked in circles, trying to figure out if I had the wrong spot. But I was sure. I recognized the boulder nearby, the curve of the trail. It was the same place. My stomach dropped. I stood still for a long time, just listening again. Still nothing, just wind. That's when I noticed a new sign. A snapped twig about waist high, bent inward along the trail I'd just walked. Someone had marked it, a directional sign. Hunters sometimes use those, but this was too deliberate, too clean. It hadn't been there yesterday. I turned around and went straight back to camp. My gut told me something was off. I packed up everything, faster than I ever had before. Tent, bag, stove, everything stuffed into the pack. I was sweating even though it was cold, but I didn't leave right away. As I bent to tie my boot, I heard another noise, this time much closer. A rustling of leaves, then the unmistakable crack of a branch underfoot. I froze. I didn't move. I didn't even look up. I waited, listening. Then silence. I slowly stood and scanned the trees. There was nothing, but I felt watched. That kind of instinct you can't explain. I slung the rifle over my shoulder and started walking, as calm and steady as I could. Not fast, just steady. But my heart was pounding. After 10 minutes, I stopped to look back. That's when I saw him. About 100 feet away, partially hidden behind a tree, was a man. He was just standing there, not moving, watching me. I couldn't see much. He wore dark clothes and some kind of hat, maybe a hood. His posture wasn't threatening, but it wasn't casual either. He wasn't hiking. He wasn't lost. He was just there. I stared for maybe 3 seconds. Then I turned and kept walking. Faster now. I didn't run. Not yet. I followed the trail back toward my truck. It would take at least 2 hours if I moved fast. I didn't stop again. I didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't look back. But I kept hearing things. Not loud, just enough to know I wasn't alone. The soft thud of footfalls behind me, matching my pace. A slight shift in the underbrush, then silence. A snapping sound just off to the right. Each time I stopped, the sound stopped too. By the time I reached the ridge above the parking area, my legs were shaking. I crouched low and scanned the trees behind me. I saw nothing, but I knew he was still back there. I felt it in my bones. I got to the truck and unlocked it fast. I tossed my pack into the bed, got in, and locked the doors. I started the engine and pulled out, gravel kicking up behind me. I didn't see him again. But I didn't stop driving for a long time. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a figure in the road behind me. When I finally reached the highway, I pulled into the first gas station and parked under the lights. I sat there for almost 10 minutes before going inside. I didn't call the cops. What would I even say? That someone had followed me in the woods? That he hadn't said anything or done anything, but just watched? They'd think I was paranoid. Maybe I was. But I've never gone camping alone again. And now, every time I hear a twig snap in the forest, my heart still jumps. Not because I'm afraid of bears or mountain lions, but because I know that sometimes the scariest thing out there is another person watching, waiting, and never saying a word. We picked that spot mostly because it was quiet and far enough from any paved road that you couldn't hear passing cars. Just thick trees, rocks, and the kind of silence that buzzes in your ears. The four of us, me, Jaden, Mark, and Luis, had done a few camping trips before, but this one was different. We didn't go to a national park or a public campground. This time, we picked a patch of wilderness that Jaden's uncle had told him about. Private land, technically, but abandoned for years. Jaden said his uncle used to hunt out there, and no one had used the trails in at least a decade. The hike in took most of the day. It wasn't steep, but the trail was completely overgrown. The sun was still up when we reached a clearing by a slow-moving stream. Trees surrounded us in all directions except for the water. That's where we pitched the tents. 2 tents, Mark and Luis in one, me and Jaden in the other. By the time we built a fire and cooked some cheap hot dogs, the light had started to drop. The sky went from that warm orange to a deep, dark blue, and the bugs came out in full force. It wasn't too bad, though. We had bug spray and each of us was tired enough not to care. That first night passed without anything strange. We stayed up late talking about random stuff. Stupid stories from high school, old crushes, a guy Jaden knew who wrecked a 4-wheeler trying to outrun a turkey. The fire burned down to embers by the time we crawled into the tents. I remember lying there, staring at the dark ceiling of the tent, listening to the chirping insects and distant frogs, and feeling more relaxed than I had in months. The next morning, we woke up early. No one set an alarm, but we were all up not long after sunrise. The plan was to explore a bit deeper into the woods, maybe follow the stream and see where it led. We didn't bring phones. Well, we did, but no one had service, so they stayed in the packs most of the time. I had a compass and a laminated map that covered the general region, but nothing detailed. Jaden had a decent sense of direction, though, and he said he'd been around this area years ago with his uncle. We packed snacks and water and followed the stream for maybe 3 hours, keeping it always to our left. It twisted through the forest like a lazy snake, and sometimes we had to hop over it on rocks or find narrow spots to cross. We found some old animal tracks, deer mostly, maybe a raccoon, and at one point a rusted-up piece of farm equipment buried halfway in the weeds. It looked like part of a plow or a tiller. Out of place, but also a sign that people used to live or work in these woods, maybe decades ago. By early afternoon, the heat was starting to wear on us. We decided to head back. Jaden took the lead, walking faster than usual. At one point, we passed a fallen tree, and he stopped suddenly. There were footprints in the soft dirt. Fresh ones. Not animals. Boots. Maybe work boots or hiking boots, but definitely human. They were going the opposite direction, toward where we had just come from. None of us said anything right away, but I could tell we were all thinking the same thing. We hadn't seen or heard anyone since we got there. No tire tracks, no campfire smoke in the distance, no voices, just trees and silence. Seeing footprints that didn't belong to us was unsettling. Jaden bent down to look closer. The prints were deeper at the heel, like the person had been walking quickly. We didn't make a big deal out of it, just kept walking, but a little more alert. The woods felt different after that. Still quiet, but now it felt like it was watching. Every snapped twig or rustled leaf made my heart skip a little. We reached camp around mid-afternoon. Everything looked normal. Tents still zipped up, bags untouched, the little pile of firewood still sitting where we left it. But we still took a few minutes to check everything just to be sure. We spent the rest of the day close to camp. No one said it out loud, but none of us wanted to wander off again. We cooked more food, collected more firewood, and tried to pretend like nothing was off. But the air felt heavier now, more still. Even the birds seemed quieter. When night fell, we built the fire bigger than the night before. No one wanted to be caught in the dark with just a flashlight. We stayed up later too, just watching the flames and listening. But the woods didn't make the same sounds. No frogs, fewer bugs, just the occasional snap of a branch far off, or the whisper of wind through the trees. Around midnight, we turned in. Couldn't sleep. I just lay there, staring at the roof of the tent, heart beating too fast, ears straining for anything unusual. Jaden seemed asleep, his breathing steady. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just some hiker passing through, maybe someone hunting illegally, but that didn't help. Eventually, I must have dozed off. I woke up to a noise outside the tent. Not a loud one, just a soft, rhythmic sound. like footsteps, but not regular, more like someone walking very slowly, carefully. I held my breath. The steps got closer, then stopped. I didn't dare move. A few seconds passed. Then I heard the crunch of leaves again, circling around our tent. Then nothing. I waited a long time before I moved. I didn't hear anything else, but I could feel something, like a presence just outside. I stayed frozen for what felt like an hour. Eventually, I fell asleep again, or at least blacked out from stress. In the morning, Jaden looked rough. He said he hadn't slept much either. Neither had Mark or Luis. All of us had heard something. We found more footprints in the dirt. Not ours. A single pair circling both tents. They looked fresher than the ones from before. We spent the whole day debating what to do. Jaden wanted to stay, said it was probably just a hunter passing by. Mark was on the fence. Luis and I wanted to leave, but in the end we agreed to stay one more night, but to set up some noise traps. Strings with empty cans, small piles of sticks to break if stepped on, that kind of thing. We also kept the fire going bigger, and we all agreed not to sleep until sunrise. That night dragged on. None of us talked. We just sat, each of us facing a different direction around the fire, flashlights in hand. A couple times, one of the cans would rattle slightly, but it could have been wind or small animals. Still, we were on edge. Around 3 a.m., I saw movement between the trees. Just a flash of something passing between trunks. I whispered to the others and pointed. Jaden shined his flashlight in that direction. Nothing. Then Mark saw something to the left. Another flash, but it was always quick, like whoever or whatever was out there didn't want to be seen fully. We stayed that way until the sun finally started to rise. Then we packed everything up. Fast. We didn't eat, didn't talk, just rolled up the tents, stuffed them in our bags, doused the fire, and left. We didn't follow the stream this time. We took a straighter, rougher path out, using the compass and sun for direction. Took longer, but none of us cared. We just wanted out. It was only once we reached the car, dirty and sweaty, that we really looked at each other. Mark had scratches on his arms he didn't remember getting. Jaden had a bruise on his side that looked like a thumbprint. My backpack had a small tear that hadn't been there the day before. No one said anything on the drive back. We didn't talk about it for weeks. Eventually, Jaden messaged all of us in the group chat, saying he went back to show his uncle where we'd camped. He said the trail in was gone, like completely overgrown, even more than before. The clearing, covered in brush. No sign we had ever camped there. No footprints, no fire pit, nothing. None of us have gone camping since. And even now, when I think back to that night, the circling footsteps, the flickers between trees, the sudden silence, I don't know what was out there. But I know it wasn't just an animal. And I know we were being watched. Not from a distance, from close, closer than we thought. I don't think I'll ever camp alone again. Not after what happened that weekend. I've been planning the trip for a while. Nothing special. Just a solo getaway to get out of the city and be around some trees for a few days. I didn't tell many people. Just left a quick note with my roommate. Told him the general area I'd be heading. Somewhere in the Angeles National Forest, but nothing too specific. I packed up my gear on a Friday morning, tossed it all in the back of my Subaru, and headed out before noon. I had 2.5 days of quiet planned. Just me, the woods, and maybe a notebook if I got bored. I didn't take any trailhead or designated campground. I drove until I found an old fire road that looked like it hadn't been used much. There weren't any signs saying no entry, and it wasn't blocked off, just a bit overgrown. I parked where the road narrowed, packed my bag, locked the car, and set out walking up into the trees. The forest was bone dry from the summer heat, and everything had that dusty smell of old pine and hot dirt. I hiked for about 2 hours, following a narrow game trail that split off from the road and dropped down into a shallow valley. The area felt quiet, untouched. No trash, no fire rings, no signs that people came through here often. I found a flat clearing maybe 30 feet across, surrounded by thick chaparral and pines. Felt tucked away and safe. I pitched my tent at the edge, set up my little camping stove, filtered some water from a tiny stream a few hundred feet down a slope, and got settled in. The first day was peaceful. I made dinner, just instant noodles and jerky, then sat back against a log and watched the sun dip below the treetops. As it got darker, the forest came alive with the usual night sounds. Crickets, a few owls, the occasional snapping branch from a deer moving through the brush. I crawled into my sleeping bag around 9, dead tired from the hike and the heat. I fell asleep almost instantly. The second day started normal. I made coffee, then followed the same trail deeper into the valley, exploring without any real destination. Around noon, I found an old metal water tank hidden in the trees, rusted and covered in graffiti, sitting on a concrete slab with weeds pushing through the cracks. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. I took a few pictures, then turned back. That evening, as I was cooking dinner, I noticed something odd. The silence. It wasn't total. There were still the occasional chirps and rustles, but it felt thinner, like the background hum of the woods had dimmed. I tried to brush it off, probably just in my head. I hadn't seen a single person since I left the road, and isolation does weird things to your brain. I ate, cleaned up, and got into the tent before it got too cold. It was maybe 2 in the morning when I woke up the first time. Not because of a sound exactly, but because something felt off. I couldn't explain it. It wasn't a dream. I just sat up suddenly in my sleeping bag. Alert. The tent was quiet. No wind. No movement. I unzipped the door just a little and peeked out. Nothing. Just black trees and shadows. I lay back down, told myself to relax, but my heart was racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching the tent. Not moving around or making noise, just watching. The kind of stare that sticks to your skin. I stayed awake for a long time, just listening. Eventually, I must have drifted off. The next morning, I was groggy. My back ached. I made coffee and tried to laugh off the nerves. I told myself it was just the tension of being alone. Too much time with no human voices messes with your head. I decided I'd pack up and hike back to the car that afternoon instead of staying another night. But then I saw the footprints. They weren't mine. I had clear tread patterns on my boots, and these were different, shallower, smoother, like they came from an old sneaker or something. Just 2 prints, near the edge of the clearing, pointing toward my tent. No others leading in or away. Just those 2. I stood there for a long time staring at them. My stomach dropped. I crouched down, checked the dirt. They weren't fresh, maybe made during the night when the ground was slightly damp from condensation. But I hadn't heard anyone. No footsteps, no twigs snapping. Whoever made them had walked soft, real soft. I didn't waste time. I packed fast. I didn't even make breakfast. Tent down, stove packed, food sealed. I got my bag on my shoulders and started back the way I'd come. I wasn't running, but I wasn't strolling either. I had one hand on the bear spray clipped to my waist. I checked over my shoulder a dozen times. The trail back seemed longer. The dry brush scraped against my legs, and the sun felt hotter than it had on the way in. When I finally got back to the fire road, I almost jogged the last stretch. I could see my car through the trees, still sitting where I left it, nothing disturbed. Then I saw the hood. There were small scratches across the front of it, thin lines like from a knife or a key. I stared at them, then circled the car. More marks along the driver's side door. Not deep, just enough to strip the paint. I checked the locks, still secured. I unlocked it, checked inside. Nothing stolen, nothing moved, but someone had been here. I got in, started the engine, and drove. I didn't stop until I hit the main highway. I pulled off into a gas station and just sat there for a while, parked in the shade, trying to slow my breathing. That should have been the end of it. Just a creepy weekend. Maybe some local messing with me. But when I got home, things got worse. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to seem paranoid. But 3 nights later, I noticed someone had been in my backyard. The motion sensor light was on when I got up to get water. I looked out the kitchen window and saw it swinging gently like it had just been triggered. Nothing was out there, but the gate was slightly open. I live in a quiet neighborhood, not the kind of place where people wander into backyards. I checked the gate the next morning, No signs of force, just open. 2 nights after that, there was a noise on my porch. A slow, dragging noise. By the time I got to the door and opened it, there was nothing there. But I found a strip of duct tape stuck to the doorknob. Just a 6-inch piece, dangling like a tail. That's when I called the cops. They took a report but said there wasn't much they could do. No camera footage, no clear suspect. I bought cameras the next day. 1 for the porch, 1 for the backyard. For a week, nothing happened. The motion lights stayed off. The cameras didn't catch anything. I started to breathe easy again. Maybe it was just unrelated. Coincidence. Then the footage came. It was a Wednesday night, around 3:14 a.m. The porch camera triggered. The footage showed a figure walking up the sidewalk toward my door. Not running, not sneaking, just walking slow. No face visible, hood pulled up, head down. The person walked right to the door, bent down like they were checking the lock, then stood up and stared straight into the camera for 10 solid seconds. Then they turned and walked away. I never saw their face. I gave the footage to the police. They filed it, said they'd patrol the area more often. But I could tell they didn't expect anything to come of it. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep the next one either. I moved a week later, didn't give a forwarding address, didn't update my voter registration. I just packed and left. New town, new job, new locks on every door. I haven't gone camping since. I hadn't been camping in years, not since I was a teenager. Life had just gotten in the way, college, work, a brief stint living in the city. But after quitting my job and moving back home to reset, I realized I missed the quiet. I missed the dirt under my nails and the smell of wood smoke. I wanted to be uncomfortable again, wanted to feel that healthy sort of tired you only get from being outside all day. So I packed a tent, a sleeping bag, some canned food, and a small stove. I borrowed my brother's old beat-up Jeep and drove out to an area I'd heard about from a guy at the hardware store. He told me about a place roughly 2 hours north where you could camp off-trail and still be inside national forest land. He said there were creeks, thick trees, wildlife, and barely anyone else ever around. That sounded perfect. I didn't want camp neighbors with RVs or people playing music through Bluetooth speakers. I wanted silence and space. The last 10 miles to the spot were all dirt road. Not smooth gravel, real, rutted, bone-shaking dirt. I had to go slow in some places where it looked like rain had carved ditches into the road. The woods got thicker and darker the deeper I drove. I passed a small, rusted sign that just said, "Primitive Use Area." No map, no trailhead, no real indication of how far anything was. Eventually, I found a small clearing off to the side, barely visible from the road, just wide enough for the Jeep and a tent. A few fallen logs, thick grass, and a small game trail that ran deeper into the woods. I parked and turned off the engine. For a moment, the silence pressed in like a wall. No wind, no distant cars, just the ticking of the engine as it cooled and a single bird calling far off in the trees. I set up my tent close to the trees for shade, careful to clear away sticks and pine cones underneath. I hung my food from a high branch with paracord, maybe 20 feet away from the tent, just like I remembered from scouts. Then I made a small fire pit with rocks, gathered some dry wood and kindling, and got a little fire going before it got dark. The first night was peaceful. I sat by the fire and watched the flames dance until they collapsed into glowing coals. The temperature dropped quickly, and I could see my breath. I crawled into my sleeping bag, zipped it up, and listened to the night around me. I heard the high yip of a fox once, and some scurrying in the leaves not far from the tent, but nothing threatening. The second day, I decided to hike down the game trail. I took my backpack, a knife, water, and a couple snacks. I also had a paper map I'd bought at a gas station nearby. It wasn't super detailed, but gave me a rough idea of where creeks and ridgelines were. I figured I'd follow the game trail down to a nearby stream I saw on the map and head back before sunset. The trail was easy at first, soft earth, plenty of animal tracks, broken branches. After about 30 minutes, I reached the stream. It wasn't wide, maybe 6 feet across, but clear and cold. I refilled my bottle using a filter and sat on a smooth rock to eat a granola bar. Everything felt still, almost too still. That's when I heard the rustling. Not from one direction, but several, like something moving in the underbrush nearby. Stopped, then started again, closer. First, I thought deer. Maybe they'd caught my scent. But I didn't hear hooves. The movement wasn't fast and crashing like deer bolting. It was slow, careful. Something was creeping, not running. I stood up and scanned the tree-line. I didn't see anything, but the hairs on my arms were standing up. I had the feeling I was being watched. Not just watched closely from more than one place. I turned and started walking back. Not fast, but steady. I kept checking over my shoulder. Still no movement, but the rustling continued, now mirroring me. Every time I walked, I heard it. When I stopped, it stopped. When I finally reached camp, the Jeep looked like the safest place in the world. I climbed in, locked the doors, and just sat there for a while, heart pounding. I kept scanning the woods. I didn't see anything, but I didn't feel alone. That night, I didn't light a fire. I didn't want to draw attention. I sat in the dark inside my tent, listening. The crickets and frogs had gone quiet. Total silence, except for occasional soft crunches of leaves. Once, I heard a short, sharp sound, like wood snapping, but not under pressure, more like a deliberate snap. Eventually, exhaustion won. I slept, but not well. I kept dreaming I was being followed, always out of sight, always just behind a tree. The next morning, I found something that made my stomach drop. My food bag was still in the tree, but it had been slashed. Long, thin cuts along the side, like from a blade or very sharp claws. Whatever it was didn't manage to get anything out, but it definitely tried. Then I found the prints. Not shoe prints, bare feet. Human. They circled my tent once, twice. They were faint but unmistakable. No shoes, no tread, just toes and heels in the dirt. I packed everything immediately. I didn't even cook breakfast. I stuffed my gear into the Jeep in a mess and started the engine. The drive out felt like a marathon. Every bend in the road, I expected something to step out. I checked my mirror constantly, but nothing followed. I didn't see anything on the way back. Just the road and the trees and the occasional bird. It wasn't until I got home and started unpacking that I noticed what really chilled me. The back of my tent, the side facing away from the fire pit, had a long slash in the fabric. Not all the way through, just the outer layer, as if someone or something had run a knife or a claw along it gently. It hadn't cut deep enough to get through to the inner mesh, and I'd been sleeping with my back to that side. I never heard it happen. I threw the tent away. That was 6 months ago. I haven't been camping since. I keep thinking about the footprints, how quiet it all was, how it didn't try to take anything but got close enough to touch the fabric inches from my sleeping body. And most of all, I think about how it didn't want to be seen. Whatever it was careful. It didn't break branches or make a scene. Came at night. It watched. It circled. Could have done something worse, but it didn't. It just let me know that it had been there. I don't think I'll ever go camping alone again. It started as a simple weekend plan. I just wanted to get away for a few days, away from traffic, from city noise, from emails and messages and people. I'd been dealing with too much at work, deadlines, people not pulling their weight, long hours. I was feeling tense, burned out, even getting those short bursts of chest pain from stress that I'd been trying to ignore. So I packed up my camping gear Friday morning, threw it in the back of my SUV, and left town by noon. I didn't tell many people where I was going, just my brother. I texted him the name of the general area, Big Crow Lake, about 4 hours north, but didn't go into detail. I didn't want to be bothered. The plan was to camp off-trail, away from the main sites where families and weekend crowds usually camped. I had researched a little and saw there were a few access points where I could park, hike in a couple miles, and set up near a small lake or stream. I liked being isolated. I always found some sort of peace in the silence, just hearing wind through the trees or the faint sound of water. I reached the dirt road turnoff by around 4 p.m. The drive-in was slow, filled with potholes and loose gravel. The sun was still high, but I knew I had about 3 hours of daylight left. I parked the SUV in a small clearing near an old logging road that looked barely used. The forest around was thick pine and birch with undergrowth here and there, but the path looked manageable. I threw on my pack, made sure I had my map and compass, and locked up the car. Then I started walking. The trail was rough but clear enough. I passed a small creek after about 40 minutes, and I kept going, hoping to find something flatter and more secluded. Around an hour and a half in, I found it. Just off the trail to the left, down a slight slope, there was a patch of flat ground with just enough open space for a tent, and about 30 yards beyond that, a small pond surrounded by reeds and tall grass. It was perfect. No sign of people, no litter, no fire pits, or any evidence that someone else had been there. I dropped my pack, checked my bearings, and decided to make camp. The ground was soft but not marshy. I cleared the area of pine cones and sticks, then set up my one-person tent. It was a little uneven, but good enough. I laid out my sleeping bag, blew up my pad, and then pulled out my small cook kit and food bag. I got the stove going, boiled some water, and made a freeze-dried meal, nothing exciting, but it was warm. As I ate, the sky turned golden and the air cooled fast. The forest started to get quieter, shadows stretching out as the sun dipped behind the trees. I didn't have a fire, there was no ring, and I didn't want to risk anything. Besides, I kind of liked the dark. Once I was done eating, I cleaned up, packed my food into a bear bag, tied it off on a high branch away from camp, and zipped myself into my tent. I read a bit on my Kindle, then shut off my headlamp and lay back, listening. The first night was calm. I heard the usual crickets, the occasional splash from the pond, wind brushing through the trees. At one point, I heard a larger movement, like something heavy stepping over dry sticks, maybe a deer, but it didn't come close. I didn't feel scared. I fell asleep easily. The next morning was crisp and gray. Overcast sky, no real sun. I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the cold air, stretching. My breath came out in faint white clouds. I boiled water for coffee, sat on a fallen log, and just listened. Birds were moving around in the trees. The forest still felt peaceful. Around mid-morning, I packed a small day bag with snacks and water and decided to explore further down the slope behind the pond. The map showed a ridge beyond that, and I figured I might get a better view from the top. I made a mental note of landmarks and started walking, keeping my compass pointed. The ground dropped steeply, and I had to use roots and trunks to keep my footing in places. It took longer than I thought to reach the bottom of the slope, and from there it was another 30 minutes to climb the ridge. The view at the top wasn't much, just more trees stretching out in every direction, but it felt good to get the blood moving. I sat on a rock and ate a granola bar. That's when I noticed something strange. Down the opposite side of the ridge, about 100 yards away, I saw a faint trail. It wasn't on the map, not even a dotted one, but it looked used. Narrow, slightly worn into the slope. It headed east, deeper into the woods. I was curious. I followed it. I know now that was a mistake, but at the time it didn't feel like one. It wasn't marked, but it was clearly a path. Someone had walked it. I followed it for about 20 minutes before I noticed the woods changing. The trees grew denser, and the undergrowth thinned out. The air smelled different, mustier, almost. I felt a strange tightness in my chest. Not fear exactly, just alertness. Then I saw the old shack. It was tucked between the trees, just far enough off the path that I might have missed it if I wasn't looking. The roof was half caved in, the walls gray with age, boards missing. There was no door, just a dark, hollow space inside. I stood about 30 feet back, just staring at it. It didn't look like a hunter's cabin. It was too small for that, more like a shed. But why out here? It had no road access, no signs of recent use. I looked for tracks but saw nothing fresh, just old tire ruts long overgrown with moss. I didn't go in. Something about it felt off. I can't explain it. I just stood there for a few minutes, then backed away and returned to the trail. I hiked back toward camp, slower this time, constantly glancing over my shoulder. It felt like the trees were closer now. I reached my tent just as the light started to fade. I made dinner quickly, nerves buzzing under my skin. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept hearing things. Not animal sounds, those I could handle. These were slower, heavier. Twice I thought I heard snapping branches, but I couldn't see anything when I unzipped the tent and looked. My headlamp cut across the trees, but there was nothing, just stillness. Morning came gray again. I was tired, on edge, but I told myself it was just my imagination. Still, I decided I'd leave that evening instead of staying another night. I packed up slowly, trying to enjoy my last day. Around mid-afternoon, I went back down to the pond to fill my water bottles. I crouched at the edge, filtering water, when I saw the boot print. It was in the mud, about 10 feet to the right of where I knelt. Not mine. The sole pattern was different, wider, deeper treads, and it faced toward the trees. Recent, too. The edges weren't dried or crumbling. Someone had been here. I stood up slowly, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. I couldn't hear anything. I backed away, heart thumping in my chest, and returned to camp. I packed up quickly, not even boiling water for food. It was nearly 6 p.m. when I started hiking out. I knew I wouldn't reach my car before dark, but I didn't care. I'd used the headlamp. I just wanted to get out. I kept checking behind me as I walked, every few minutes. The trail looked the same, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. About 30 minutes in, I heard something behind me, a crack, then another, slow, deliberate. I stopped and turned. My headlamp was already on, and the beam lit up the trail behind me. But there was nothing. Then I heard it again, to the left, deeper in the woods. Another step, then quiet. I walked faster. I didn't run, not yet, but my heart was hammering. I kept moving, stepping over roots, ducking under low branches, trying to keep my pace up without tripping. Then I heard it again, closer now. I froze and turned off my headlamp. Total darkness. I crouched low behind a fallen log, heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I waited. Then I saw it, just a flash. Movement between the trees, maybe 50 feet away. A figure. No flashlight. No headlamp. Just a silhouette. They moved quietly, too quietly for someone hiking at dusk. I stayed crouched until I couldn't hear anything. Then I moved. I didn't go back to the trail. I turned off my headlamp and moved parallel to it, using the compass and my memory to aim for the road. I knew the general direction. I kept low, moved slow, trying not to break sticks. My legs shook with each step. Took me 2 hours, maybe more. I crossed the trail once, then again. I heard no more sounds, saw nothing else, but I never stopped looking. When I finally saw the glint of my car through the trees, I nearly collapsed. I burst out of the woods and ran the last 20 yards, fumbling with the keys. I jumped in, locked the doors, and sat there breathing hard, staring out at the dark trees. I turned the key. The engine started. I reversed out of there so fast my tires threw gravel into the trees. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station 20 miles down the highway. I sat under the fluorescent lights, eating vending machine peanuts and trying to calm down. I never reported it. What would I say? That I saw a boot print and heard footsteps? That someone was following me? But I know what I heard, and I know that print wasn't mine. Weeks later, we parked the truck at the turnout just before the dirt road turned too rough to trust the tires. I killed the engine, and everything went quiet. There was no cell signal out there, hadn't been for the last 20 minutes. We were about 30 miles from the nearest gas station and at least 2 hours from the nearest town that had more than one restaurant. The forest out here was thick, pines and firs, dense enough that even when the sun was high, the woods stayed cool and dim under the branches. It was early evening when we started hiking toward the clearing we'd picked out on the satellite maps. Me and my older cousin Alan had been planning this trip for weeks. It was his idea. He wanted a full weekend out there. No phones, no GPS, no roads. Just old-school compass and topographic maps. We carried our packs with everything we'd need: tent, food, first aid, bear spray, the works. The hike wasn't bad at first. We followed a game trail that wound between the trees, narrow and steep in some spots. The dirt was dry and soft, and we left tracks without trying. We passed broken branches, patches of coyote scat, and at one point a small pile of bones, rabbit or squirrel maybe. It was all part of the setting, that wild, untouched kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the only person who's walked there in years. After about an hour and a half of hiking, we came to the clearing. It was just like the maps showed. Flat, open, with a ring of tall trees around the edge like a natural wall. There were a few fallen logs, some big rocks, but nothing that would get in the way of setting up camp. The place looked perfect. We set down our packs, pitched the tent, and started gathering wood for a fire. The sun dipped behind the trees while we worked. I remember how fast it seemed to get dark. 1 minute we were sweating in the golden light, the next it was cool and shadowy, and we were digging out headlamps and jackets. The wind picked up a little too. Not much, just enough to rustle the treetops and make it feel colder than it was. We got the fire going with some dry kindling and sat around it, eating the sandwiches we'd packed and boiling water for tea. The night felt calm. Too calm, maybe. I kept hearing little things. Sticks cracking, leaves crunching. But it was the woods. Animals do that all the time. Alan said nothing, just stared into the fire. He'd been out in the wilderness more than me, so I figured he was relaxed. I tried to match his energy. After an hour or so, we zipped ourselves into the tent, left the food tied in a bag up in a tree like you're supposed to, and turned in. Sometime around 2 a.m., I woke up. I didn't know why. The fire had burned down to glowing coals, and the wind was gone. Everything was dead silent. I lay there, eyes wide open, trying to figure out what had pulled me out of sleep. I thought maybe it was an animal, a deer maybe, or something larger. Then I heard it again, a sound I couldn't place. It wasn't a growl or a footstep. It was more like a scraping, slow, almost methodical, like something dragging against the bark of a tree. Then it stopped. For maybe 10 seconds, there was nothing. Then another sound, this time closer. A faint snap of a twig. I held my breath, straining to listen. Still nothing. The forest felt like it was holding its breath too. No wind, no bugs, no rustling in the trees. Just silence. A thick kind that pressed against my ears. I thought about waking Alan, but I didn't. Could have just been a raccoon or something. I lay still, heart pounding, waiting for another sound. But nothing came. Eventually, I must have drifted off again. When I woke up the next morning, I didn't mention it. No point. The sun was out, the birds were chirping, and Alan was already up boiling water. We ate breakfast, packed some snacks, and went off to explore the ridge about a mile west of camp. It was steep in spots, but when we got to the top, the view was worth it. You could see the entire valley, with the treetops stretching out in all directions. Not a road or building in sight. We stayed out most of the day. I didn't think about the night until we got back and I saw the marks. They were on the tree about 15 feet from the tent. Fresh scrapes, long ones, deep, 3 lines, spaced like claw marks, dragged down the bark at shoulder height. I stood there looking at them for a long time. Alan came over and frowned. He ran a hand over the grooves, then looked around. We didn't talk about it, but I could tell it got to him. We finished the day like normal. Another fire, another meal, more sitting around as the sun went down. But neither of us really relaxed after that. We kept looking out into the trees like something might step out at any second. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay there wide awake, listening. Every noise felt sharp. Every gust of wind made the tent fabric flutter, and every flutter sounded like movement. Around midnight, I heard something again. Not scraping this time, footsteps. Slow, steady, crunching the dead leaves. Not the kind of noise a rabbit makes. Something heavy, careful. It moved around the edge of the clearing, not coming straight at us, just circling. I couldn't see anything through the tent fabric. I didn't dare unzip it. I just lay there, frozen, my muscles locked up, barely breathing. The steps would stop for a few seconds, then start again, always on the edge. Then they stopped for good, and I waited, for minutes, maybe hours. I don't know. I must have fallen asleep again at some point, because when I opened my eyes, the sky was gray and the birds were singing. Alan looked pale. He didn't say much. Neither did I. We packed up our gear in silence, doused the fire, and started hiking back toward the truck. No breakfast, no exploring, just a fast walk back the way we came. We didn't stop until we reached the turnout, but the truck wouldn't start. I turned the key and the engine clicked. Dead battery. No lights, no dashboard, nothing. Alan tried it too. Same thing. We both stared at each other. It made no sense. We hadn't left anything on. The battery had been strong when we arrived. We checked under the hood. Everything looked fine, no cut wires, no signs of damage. But the truck was dead. We stood there, silent, each of us trying to figure out what to do. No cell signal, no working vehicle. We were stranded. We decided to walk. It was 28 miles to the highway. Maybe we'd find someone driving on the old dirt road, but we couldn't count on it. We loaded water and food into our packs and started walking. The air was hot, and the sun beat down through the trees. After about 3 hours, we came to a fork in the road. The main trail continued, but a narrow, less used path branched off to the left. Alan stopped and stared at it. I asked him if he wanted to take the shortcut. We'd seen it on the map. It was supposed to cut off a couple miles. He didn't answer at first, then nodded. We followed it. Big mistake. About half a mile down, the path narrowed into a rocky ditch between two steep ridges. Trees arched overhead, blocking the sun. The dirt turned damp. The air was still. No birds, no wind. Then we saw it. A set of fresh boot prints in the mud ahead. Big ones, deep, but they weren't heading away. They were heading toward us. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. We both stopped. Alan crouched down to look closer. The prints weren't ours. We'd been walking side by side. These came from someone else. Someone alone. Then I saw something else. In the mud just beyond the prints, a shape. Not a footprint. A handprint. A full palm. Pressed into the mud like someone had knelt there. I wanted to turn around, but the ridge walls were steep. We'd have to backtrack almost a mile. Alan said nothing, just stood up and kept walking. I followed, heart hammering. We kept going for maybe another 10 minutes, the woods around us closing in, the trail getting harder to follow. Then the smell hit us. It was sharp, metallic, like rust or blood. We both stopped. I turned slowly in a circle, looking for the source. That's when I saw the shredded backpack hanging from a branch about 10 feet off the ground. It looked torn, ripped open from the side, dangling by one strap. The other strap was gone. We turned and left, fast, no talking, just moving. We didn't run, but we walked hard, like something was behind us, just out of sight. I kept looking over my shoulder. Nothing there, but I felt it. We didn't stop until we hit the main road again. 6 more miles. No one passed us. No other hikers. No trucks. Nothing. The whole area felt wrong, like the woods were watching. Eventually, late in the afternoon, we saw a car. An old pickup, rusty and loud, driven by a rancher heading into town. He gave us a lift all the way to a gas station where we could call a tow truck. The mechanic checked the truck, said the battery was totally drained, like something had left the lights on all night. But we hadn't. We were sure of it. Alan didn't want to talk about any of it after that. He said it was probably just animals, maybe a bear or mountain lion. But I don't camp much anymore. Not because I hate the outdoors or because I'm lazy or anything like that. I actually used to love it. The feeling of getting away from the city, the silence of the woods, the smell of pine and dirt and firewood. It all used to feel like something sacred. But after what happened on that trip last summer, I can't bring myself to even look at my old tent without a twist in my stomach. I don't think I've even unpacked my gear since that weekend. Started pretty normal. Me and my buddy Ray had been planning this trip for months. The idea was simple. A 3-day camping trip way up north, deep in one of those national forests that barely show up on the maps. The kind where there's no cell signal, no nearby towns, and barely any marked trails. Just trees, rocks, rivers, and quiet. We wanted remote. We wanted isolation. Ray had this old hiking book from the early 2000s with a bunch of handwritten notes in the margins from his dad, who used to do solo treks through the same region. One spot in the book had a circle around it with the words "secluded." No one around for miles. Great views. Good water source. That was all we needed. We left early on a Friday morning. It was about a 6-hour drive up from the city, most of it on winding 2-lane roads with barely any signage. We stopped in a small town to grab fuel and some snacks, then kept driving until the pavement ended. After that, it was another 45 minutes on a gravel road with potholes big enough to eat a tire. We passed one other car, an old rusted pickup going the opposite way, and then nothing else. Just trees and dust and the occasional deer darting off into the brush. When we reached the point marked in Ray's book, we parked off the road near a shallow pullout and started hiking in. We each had heavy packs loaded with gear, food, water filters, sleeping bags, the usual stuff. The hike itself wasn't too bad. A couple miles through thick woods with a slight incline. No real trail to follow, just the GPS app on Ray's phone and the notes from his dad's book. We moved slow, taking breaks often, stopping to look at strange mushrooms or twisted trees. The forest was thick, but not impassable. Tall pine trees stretched up like they were trying to stab the sky, and the floor was carpeted with dry needles and patches of moss. After about 2 hours, we came into a clearing. It wasn't big, maybe 30 feet across, but it felt like it had been naturally cleared out. The grass was low and yellowed, probably from too much sun, and there were signs that someone had camped there before. A flat spot where a tent had been, old ashes from a long dead fire, and a few small logs that had clearly been dragged in to use as seats. Behind the clearing, maybe 50 feet away, was a steep slope that dropped into a narrow valley where a small stream ran. Felt perfect, quiet, still, almost too still. Ray set down his pack, stretched, and said something about getting the tent up before dark, but I remember feeling off. I stood there, sweating under the weight of my pack, looking at the trees that surrounded us. It wasn't that I saw anything. Nothing moved. There were no animal noises, no birds, no squirrels, not even the buzzing of insects, just silence. And that silence was heavy, like it was pressing against my ears. I shook it off and got to work. We set up our tent at the edge of the clearing, facing the slope so we could hear the water during the night. Ray gathered wood while I got the fire pit ready. By the time the sun started dipping low, we had a decent fire going and some food heating over it. The silence started to fade as evening came. We heard a few bird calls, the splash of something in the creek, even a faint rustle in the trees. I felt better. We both did. We stayed up late talking about dumb stuff, old jobs, bad exes, Ray's obsession with vintage watches. The stars came out hard and bright, like shattered glass scattered across the sky. I remember thinking I hadn't seen stars that clear in years. Eventually, the fire burned low and we crawled into our tent. We left the rain fly off since the weather was good and the sky was clear. It let us feel the night air and see the stars through the mesh. I must have fallen asleep quick because I don't remember much after lying down. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. I didn't know why at first. There wasn't a noise, not really. It was more a feeling, like something had shifted. The air felt different, heavier, colder, even though it was summer. I lay there staring up at the dark shapes of the trees above us, listening. Ray was breathing softly beside me, fully asleep. Then I heard it, a soft crunch. It wasn't loud, not like someone snapping a branch or stepping on gravel. It was subtle, like a boot pressing down on dry pine needles. It came from the far side of the clearing, near where the logs were set up around the fire. I held my breath, straining my ears. A moment passed, then another crunch, closer this time. I sat up slowly, careful not to make noise. My eyes scanned the clearing but saw nothing. It was too dark and my vision was still adjusting. I reached over and gently shook Ray awake. He groaned softly but didn't sit up. I didn't push it. The sound came again, closer still. I leaned forward, pressing my face against the mesh of the tent, trying to see through the dark. Nothing, just trees and black shapes. Then the footsteps stopped. I don't know how long I sat there, staring. Could have been minutes, could have been an hour. Eventually, I must have convinced myself it was an animal, a deer or a raccoon, because I lay back down, heart still thumping, and stared up at the sky until I finally drifted off again. In the morning, I didn't say anything to Ray. He was in a good mood, talking about going down to the stream to fish and maybe hike up the ridge on the far side of the valley. I didn't want to ruin it. Besides, I wasn't even sure it happened. I hadn't seen anything, just heard it. We spent most of the day hiking along the stream, following it uphill through narrow gullies and patches of thick brush. It was beautiful country. We stopped often to take pictures or refill our water bottles. Around mid-afternoon, we reached a small waterfall about 20 feet high that spilled into a wide pool. We stripped down and jumped in, yelling at how cold it was and laughing like idiots. When we got back to camp that evening, something felt wrong again. It was subtle. The tent was fine. Our gear was where we left it. The fire pit hadn't been touched. But there was this weird smell in the air. Faint, sour, like garbage that had been sitting in the sun too long. Ray didn't seem to notice, or maybe he just didn't care. I tried to ignore it. That night, the feeling came back even stronger. I woke up again, same as before, but this time, the air felt off, like it had weight to it, like the pressure had dropped suddenly or like we were underwater. And then the sounds started again. Not footsteps this time. Breathing came from right outside the tent. Deep, slow breaths, not labored, just steady, calm. I didn't move. I barely breathed. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would wake Ray. Then came the sound of fabric stretching. A light creak. Someone was pressing on the side of the tent. Not hard, just enough to make it bow inward slightly. I could see the shape of the pressure through the mesh. Faint outline. A hand, palm flat against the nylon. Fingers spread. I couldn't move. The hand stayed there for maybe 10 seconds. Then it disappeared. The breathing faded. Then silence. I don't remember falling asleep after that. I think I just lay there until the sky started turning gray. When the sun came up, I sat up and looked around. Ray was still asleep. I got up and walked the perimeter of the clearing. I found prints. Faint ones, but they're human boots. Not animal. Not ours. The tread was different, wider, deeper. Someone had been walking around our tent during the night. When Ray woke up, I told him everything. He thought I was messing with him at first. When I showed him the prints, his smile dropped. He got quiet. We spent the rest of the morning packing up camp. We were supposed to stay one more night, but neither of us wanted to anymore. We didn't talk much. We both kept glancing at the trees like something might step out from behind one at any moment. As we were rolling up the tent, Ray stopped and bent down. There was something small caught in the mesh on his side. He pulled it out and held it up. A button. Old, worn, metal, like the kind from a jacket or coat. It had rust around the edges and a strange design on it. Nothing fancy, just a ring with lines through it. Neither of us recognized it. We didn't say anything. We just finished packing and started hiking back. The forest felt different that day. Still too quiet. We kept expecting to see someone following us, just out of sight. But no one came. We didn't stop, didn't rest. When we got back to the car, we threw our packs in the back and got in without even brushing off the dirt. We didn't talk for most of the drive. That was a year ago. Ray doesn't camp anymore either. We looked up the area after we got home, tried to find if anyone lived nearby. The nearest house was 15 miles away. No I had been needing a break. Between work, bills, and the constant noise of life, my head felt like it had a hum in it that never turned off. A few friends and I had been tossing around the idea of a weekend trip. No phones, no signal, just a couple of tents and a patch of wilderness. The plans started like they always do, with excitement and vague promises. But like always, people backed out one by one until it was just me. By the time the weekend came, I figured, screw it, I could go on my own. I packed light, a tent, sleeping bag, a cooler with a few meals, some snacks, water bottles, a filter, and a small stove. I grabbed my old hiking pack and threw in a headlamp, extra socks, a compass, a knife, and my lighter. I wasn't new to solo camping, but I wasn't exactly Bear Grylls either. I liked remote spots, but not ones that were too extreme. A place that took a few hours to hike into, where I wouldn't hear traffic or run into other people, was just right. I found a spot near a small lake tucked inside a forest that bordered the edge of a long mountain range. The trail was mostly empty this time of year, with only a few cars in the lot when I arrived. I parked, locked the car, and hoisted the pack over my shoulders. It was heavier than I remembered, but my legs adjusted after the first half mile. The trail was narrow and shaded, soft with fallen pine needles. Every once in a while, it opened up just enough for the sun to break through. The silence was thick, except for my boots crunching over gravel or the occasional chirp of birds. The deeper I went, the more the world behind me disappeared. I passed a fork in the trail and took the less maintained route, one I had marked on my map earlier. According to what I'd read online, it led to an old, unused clearing that used to be a hunting camp back in the 70s. I figured nobody would be back there now. That's what I wanted. It took about 4 hours to reach the clearing. The trees opened up in a wide circle, and grass had grown wild across the ground. A few old logs were scattered around, half-rotted and covered in moss. There was a fire ring made of stones, probably left from whoever had camped there years ago. I dropped my pack, stretched my shoulders, and took a slow walk around the site. No trash, no footprints, no signs anyone had been there in a long time. I set up my tent near the tree line, giving myself some cover but still enough of an open view to see the sky. I laid out my sleeping bag, stashed my food in a bear canister a good distance from camp, and started boiling water for a freeze-dried dinner. As the sun lowered and the temperature dropped, everything began to quiet down even more. The birds stopped. The wind settled. It was the kind of silence that you could feel pressing against your ears. I sat near the fire pit and lit a small fire, just enough for warmth and a bit of comfort. I didn't need much. I wasn't planning on staying up late, just enough to relax, stare at the stars a bit, and then crawl into my sleeping bag. But as I sat there, I couldn't shake a strange feeling. Not fear exactly, more like a buzz in the air, like I wasn't as alone as I thought I was. Every once in a while, I'd catch a sound. A snap, a thud, a rustle in the woods, but every time I turned toward it, there was nothing. I reminded myself that woods are alive, even if you can't see what's making the noise. Deer, squirrels, wind, branches shifting, that sort of thing. I kept repeating that in my head. By around 10, I put the fire out and zipped myself into the tent. I laid on my back, staring up at the nylon ceiling, listening. It took me a long time to fall asleep. When I woke up, it was still dark. My body tensed before my eyes even opened. Something had woken me up, but I didn't know what. I stayed still, trying to hear through the layers of the tent. First, nothing, just the sound of my own breath. Then I heard it. Footsteps, not animals. I've heard deer before, raccoons, even coyotes once. This wasn't like that. These were slow, deliberate steps, one at a time. Crunch, pause, crunch. They came from the direction of the trees, not far from where my food was stashed. I thought maybe it was a bear, but bears move differently. They're heavy. They crash through. This was light, careful, measured. I held my breath. The steps stopped. Silence stretched out for what felt like minutes. I turned slowly and reached for the knife I kept next to me when I camped alone. My fingers found the handle. I stayed frozen, waiting for something else. Then I heard a low noise, like someone clearing their throat, but muffled and strange. I sat up fast. The noise stopped instantly. I fumbled for my headlamp, slapped it on, and unzipped the tent. I didn't even get out. I just shone the light across the clearing. Nothing, just trees, grass, my bare canister where I left it. I stood up and stepped out, sweeping the light across the edge of the woods. Still nothing. My heart was racing, and the cold air made my skin prickle. I stood there, listening. Then something moved, just barely. A quick flicker of motion between two trees on the far side of the clearing. I turned the light toward it, but I was too slow. I walked toward it a few steps, But I didn't leave the clearing. I just stood there, knife in one hand, light in the other. Eventually, I backed into the tent again, zipped it up, and sat there fully dressed with the knife in my lap until the sky started to lighten. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When morning came, I packed fast. I boiled water for coffee just long enough to keep my hands warm and shoved everything back into my pack. I walked to where the movement had been and looked for footprints. The ground was too hard, but some grass was pressed down in one area. Could have been anything, but I didn't like it. I told myself I was just spooked, tired, overthinking it. I almost convinced myself too, until I went to grab the bear canister. It was exactly where I left it, but the latch was undone. Not ripped, not bitten, not broken, just opened, and nothing inside was touched. All the food was still there. I couldn't explain that. I snapped it shut, stuffed it into my pack, and started back toward the trail. The hike back should have taken about 4 hours. I did it in less than 3. I didn't stop. I didn't take breaks. Every noise made me spin around. Every shift in the wind made my skin crawl. I kept seeing shapes in the trees that disappeared when I blinked. When I got back to the parking lot, my car was exactly where I left it. A few more cars were there now, probably day hikers. I opened the door, tossed the pack in, and sat behind the wheel. I didn't even turn the engine over for a while. I just sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, staring out through the windshield like something was going to follow me out of the woods. Eventually, I started the car and drove home. I didn't talk about it. Not for a long time. I didn't post photos. I didn't tell friends. I didn't go back to that trail or anywhere near that area again. Months passed. I got busy. Life went on. Then one night, I saw a thread online. Someone posted about weird things that had happened while solo camping. I started reading through them, scrolling down. Most were dumb. Strange animal sounds. Creepy vibes, typical stuff. But one post stopped me cold. It was short, no details, no explanation, just a comment. Anyone ever wake up to the sound of footsteps and find their bear canister opened but untouched? It had one like, no replies. The username was just a string of random letters. I logged out, shut my laptop, and stared at the wall for a long time. I haven't gone camping alone since. It was mid-June when I decided to go camping alone for the first time. I had always camped with friends or family before, but something about going solo had been pulling at me for a while. I wanted the quiet, the challenge, the peace that only comes when you're completely alone in the woods, away from everything. No phone, no cars, no lights, just trees, water, air, and whatever you bring with you. I had been through enough in my life that silence didn't scare me anymore. At least that's what I thought. I chose a spot that wasn't part of a regular campsite. It was about 6 miles into a state forest I had hiked a few times before. You had to park off a gravel road, hike in on foot past a closed gate, and follow an unmarked trail. It wasn't a dangerous area, just not well maintained. That was the point. Fewer people, less noise, more space to feel like the world had shrunk down to nothing but forest and sky. I packed light but smart. Tent, sleeping bag, water filter, small cook stove, knife, bear spray, snacks, a first aid kit. I had a Garmin GPS device with emergency features. I wasn't stupid, I just wanted quiet, not to die out there. It was a warm, cloudy afternoon when I reached the spot I had picked out from satellite maps. A flat clearing about 30 feet across, surrounded by tall pine and birch trees. A little stream ran nearby, just enough to fill up my water bottle. The nearest official trail was almost a mile away. No one would be coming through here unless they were just as lost or stubborn as me. I set up my tent around 4, laid out my gear, filtered some water, and made a quick meal of noodles and tuna. By 6, the clouds were dark and thick. I knew it might rain, so I set up my tarp a few feet in front of my tent, strung between 2 trees with some cord I'd brought. It gave me a dry space to sit and listen to the woods. The sound of the wind moving through the trees, the occasional rustle of squirrels, the soft trickle of the stream. It was everything I'd wanted. By 8, it was getting darker than I expected. No sunset colors, just gray turning into black. I zipped myself into my sleeping bag and turned off my headlamp, letting the dark fill the tent. I slept for a while. It's always strange the first night alone. Every noise feels sharper. A snap twig sounds like it's just outside your tent. I kept waking up every hour or so, not from fear exactly, but from that deep, animal alertness you can't shake when you're vulnerable. Sometime after midnight, I woke up again, but this time something felt off. It wasn't a sound that woke me, it was the absence of one. The wind had stopped completely, the rustling leaves, the water, everything was dead silent, so quiet it made my ears ring. I stayed still, breathing shallow, listening. Then I heard it, something very faint, like a shuffle, leaves moving in a way they shouldn't. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't random, it had weight. I held my breath. There it was again, a soft thud, then another, slow, deliberate. It was coming from somewhere to the left of the tent, maybe 20 feet away. Then nothing for a few seconds. Then it was behind me, not fast, just quiet, methodical. I stayed frozen, hand on the knife I kept inside the tent pocket. My heart was pounding in my throat. I knew enough about animals to rule out deer or squirrels. Deer stomp, they're loud. Squirrels are chaotic, not slow. This was something on 2 legs, something trying not to be heard. I didn't move. I didn't want to make a sound. The tent walls felt paper thin. I knew if I yelled or unzipped it, whoever or whatever was out there would hear. I waited. Then came the breathing, soft at first, then stronger, from the side of the tent, just on the other side of the wall, maybe 3 feet from my head. Slow, steady, human breathing. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, but I wasn't. I forced myself to stay still. I felt like a child hiding under the covers, thinking if I didn't move, it wouldn't see me. My mouth was dry. I gripped the knife tight enough that my fingers went numb. The breathing moved, slowly, around the back of the tent, then to the front, then silence again. No footsteps, just gone. I stayed that way for what felt like hours. Eventually, light started to leak into the tent. Morning had come. I lay there until it was fully light, then forced myself to sit up and unzip the tent. The forest looked normal, wet from the night's drizzle. Gray clouds still hung low, but everything looked the same as before, except for the footprints. They weren't right next to the tent, but I found them about 15 feet out, near the tree line. Bare feet, human, big, too big, the kind of footprints that have toes clearly defined in soft earth. They weren't fresh like they'd just been made. They were clean, like someone had stepped deliberately without dragging mud or leaves, like they knew where to step. They circled the clearing. I couldn't breathe for a second. My whole body tightened like I was cold, but I wasn't. I followed the prints a little, but they disappeared into the rocks and leaves. Whoever it was had been careful. I packed up fast. I kept my knife out the entire time. My hands were shaking so bad I had trouble rolling the sleeping bag. I left by a different route than I came in. I didn't want to double back through the trees where the prints had gone. It took me longer, climbing over rocks and thick brush, but I made it back to the gravel road by late afternoon. I hadn't eaten. My stomach felt like it was tied in knots. Back at my car, I checked the tires, the windows, everything looked untouched. I drove away and didn't stop until I was back in town. It's been over a year since that night. I haven't gone camping alone again. I tried to tell myself it could have been a hiker who got lost, or someone camping nearby I didn't know about. But no one walks barefoot that deep into the forest, and no one circles a tent like that in the middle of the night, breathing slow and quiet like they don't want to be caught. Whoever it was didn't want to talk. They didn't want help. They didn't want anything normal. They wanted to watch me, to scare me, or worse. Sometimes I think about how I didn't hear them leave. That still gets to me. I wonder if they watched me leave in the morning, from behind a tree or up on a ridge. I wonder if I would have heard them if I had just unzipped the tent and looked. I wonder what they would have done if I hadn't stayed quiet. There are people out there who don't live like we do. People who don't want to be found. People who aren't lost, but who wait in the woods, watching for someone like me to walk in alone. I still hike. I still go out in the woods sometimes, but I don't camp alone anymore. Not because I'm scared of animals or storms. It's the people, the ones who don't belong out there, or maybe the ones who do. That night didn't leave a mark on my body, but it left something deeper, a quiet understanding that the world isn't just trees and trails and peace. Sometimes it watches back. Sometimes it waits for you to close your eyes, and sometimes it gets close enough to breathe behind your ear. I was lucky, and I don't need to test that luck again. It started as a quick weekend escape. I needed a break from everything. Work, city noise, traffic, people. I had been working long hours, and I felt like I was constantly running on fumes. I just wanted to be somewhere quiet, somewhere I couldn't hear engines or emails. So I picked a spot deep in the national forest a few hours from where I lived. I'd been there before with a friend, but this time I planned to go alone. Just me, a tent, some basic gear, and no distractions. I packed light food for 2 days, water filter, sleeping bag, small first aid kit, and a decent knife. I had my old hiking boots, my big green pack, and a small flashlight with fresh batteries. No cell signal out there, but I brought a map and a compass just in case I wandered farther than I planned. I left early Saturday morning and parked near the ranger station. The guy inside wasn't there, but I left a note on the check-in board with my name, where I was heading, and when I expected to be back. I learned that from my dad. Always leave a trace when you go into the woods alone. The trailhead was empty, which I liked. I didn't want to run into anyone else. The sky was clear, the air smelled like pine and dust, and the only sound was the crunch of my boots and the wind through the trees. After about 5 miles, I turned off the main trail and followed a barely marked path that led deeper into the trees. It was one of those trails you have to look for, covered in dry needles and fallen branches, more like a game trail than a hiking one. I reached my spot by mid-afternoon. It was a small clearing by a creek, tucked in the shadow of a hill. The water was cold and clean, and the place was silent except for the wind and the sound of water over rocks. I pitched my tent near the edge of the clearing, just a few feet from the tree line. I boiled some water for instant noodles and sat with my back against a log, eating while I watched the shadows grow longer. As the sun dipped behind the hill, the air cooled fast. I added a layer, started a small fire, and stared into it while the sky turned orange and purple. I could feel the tension in my body slowly unwinding. I hadn't realized how tightly wounded I'd been. There was something about the quiet, the simplicity of it all, that let my thoughts slow down for once. I stayed up for a while just listening. Owls hooting in the distance, the creek bubbling, a few rustles in the underbrush that made me glance up, but nothing serious. Animals moving around, probably. After a couple hours, I killed the fire, zipped into my tent, and lay on my back staring at the roof of the nylon. My flashlight was next to me, knife too. Not because I was scared, just habit. I must have dozed off around 10. I woke up just after midnight. It wasn't a noise that woke me, exactly. It was more like the absence of noise. The creek was still there, but everything else felt too quiet. No wind, no rustling, no owls. Just this heavy stillness that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I stayed still for a minute, listening. Then I heard it, slow, deliberate footsteps, crunching leaves and sticks somewhere just outside the tent. I froze. My heart thudded in my chest, loud enough that I felt like it would give me away. I reached slowly for the flashlight and the knife. I held both tight, breathing as quietly as I could. The footsteps stopped. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. Nothing. Then they started again. Closer. I could hear the sound of boots now. Not hooves. Not paws. Boots. Someone was walking around my campsite in the middle of the night. I stayed absolutely still. The footsteps moved around the side of the tent, slow and steady. Whoever it was wasn't talking, wasn't calling out, wasn't making any noise at all besides walking. They weren't stumbling or drunk. It sounded like someone moving carefully, maybe even deliberately. I held my breath and listened. They stopped right next to the tent. I could hear them breathing, not deep or heavy, just normal breathing. Someone standing still right next to where my head was. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. My hand gripped the knife tighter. My flashlight was still off. I didn't want to shine it. Not yet. After what felt like forever, the breathing faded. The footsteps moved again. This time they walked back toward the woods. I heard branches move, leaves crunch, then silence. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I stayed in my tent, stiff as a board, knife in my hand, flashlight under my arm. Every small sound outside had me clenching up. I waited for them to come back, for the zipper of my tent to move, for something. But nothing happened. By the time the sky started to lighten, I was already packed. I shoved my gear into my pack, yanked the tent down without folding it, and started hiking back the way I came. I didn't even eat. I just wanted to be out. I moved fast, barely stopping for water, checking over my shoulder every 10 minutes. I didn't see anyone. The trail was empty. I felt like I was being watched the whole time, but I didn't see or hear anything. I reached the ranger station just after noon. The note I left was still there. There wasn't anyone at the station again, so I got in my car and left. I didn't relax until I hit the highway, surrounded by other cars and buildings and all the normal noise of the world. I didn't tell anyone right away. It sounded paranoid. Just someone walking around my tent at night? Could have been another hiker, right? Maybe they were lost. Maybe they saw my camp and thought I might have a fire going or something. But the way they moved, the way they just stood there breathing. A few days later, I looked up reports of crimes in that area. I found something. A guy had gone missing in the same part of the forest about 2 weeks earlier. He'd been camping solo. No sign of him was ever found. Just an abandoned tent, some gear scattered. No animals had torn it apart. It looked like he had just left everything behind. No one ever found him. That's when I stopped second-guessing myself. I've been camping since then, but never alone. Never that deep in the woods. I stick to marked trails. I go with friends. I keep a fire going as long as possible, and I sleep lightly, because I know what it feels like to wake up and realize someone is outside your tent in the middle of the night. Not calling for help, not asking for anything, just standing there, listening to you breathe, waiting. I was 32 when I finally decided to take a break from everything: work, traffic, screens, people. My phone had become a leash, my apartment a box, and even though I lived in the city, I was starting to feel like I hadn't really breathed in months. So I packed up my old hiking backpack, filled it with all the gear I'd collected over the years but barely used, and drove north. I didn't tell anyone exactly where I was going. I just said I needed a few days off-grid. I figured if I didn't return by Sunday, someone would check in. The place I chose was a state forest a few hours from home, but not a big tourist spot. I'd found it while scrolling through a trail forum late one night. It was all user-posted stuff, hikers talking about unmaintained trails and quiet lakes deep in the woods, places where you might go the whole weekend without seeing another soul. That sounded perfect to me. I screenshotted a rough trail map someone had uploaded, wrote down a few coordinates just in case, and loaded my gear. By the time I reached the dirt road that led into the forest, it was already late afternoon. The sun was dipping, throwing long shadows across the pine trees that lined the road like sentries. I drove until the road narrowed into a rocky mess that my old SUV barely handled. And when it looked like the path ended in a wide turnoff used by hunters and hikers, I parked, slung my pack on, and started walking. It was quiet, that kind of deep, wild quiet where even your own breathing feels too loud. I followed a barely there path marked only by an old pink ribbon tied to a tree every now and then. The deeper I went, the more the modern world fell away. No cell signal, no voices, just trees, brush, and the occasional far-off rustle from something moving through the undergrowth. After a few miles, I reached a small clearing near a stream. It wasn't on any official map, but someone had stacked rocks in a ring near the water, a sign that others had camped here before. The sound of the stream running over rocks made everything feel peaceful. It was exactly what I was looking for. I pitched my tent in a spot where the ground was soft but dry, set up my little folding chair, and started boiling water for dinner. That first night was uneventful. I sat watching the stars blink to life through the treetops, ate a dehydrated meal that wasn't half bad, and crawled into my sleeping bag around 9:30. The forest sounds lulled me to sleep. The gurgle of the stream, the occasional owl, the wind moving through the branches. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a sound I couldn't place. Not an animal, not the wind. It was a short, sharp cracking sound, like a stick snapping, but louder, closer. I laid still, listening. First, nothing. Then another crack, this time more muted. It wasn't rhythmic, not like footsteps, more like movement, like something large had shifted weight onto a fallen branch. I sat up in my sleeping bag and waited. No more sounds. I told myself it was probably a deer, maybe an elk, something normal. It was deep forest, of course there'd be wildlife. Still, I kept my small flashlight close to me and didn't fall back asleep for a while. Eventually, I must have dozed off again, because the next thing I remember is the sun filtering into the tent. The second day, I hiked around the area, mostly off-trail, just exploring. I followed the stream for a while, saw some deer prints in the mud, and found a high rock ledge where I could see a sliver of the lake I was hoping to reach the next day. I didn't see or hear another person. It was peaceful again, and I started to laugh at myself for being spooked the night before. I made it back to camp by late afternoon and did the same routine: eat, clean up, hang my food bag from a high branch, crawl into the tent early. That night, though, things were different. I woke up again. This time it wasn't a sound that woke me, it was a feeling, like something was near. I lay there in my bag, breathing slow, listening. At first, I didn't hear anything, but then I noticed the forest had gone quiet. Too quiet. No wind, no bugs, not even the stream, though I knew it hadn't stopped running. I turned on my flashlight and zipped open the tent door just a crack. I didn't shine the light out, just listened. My heart was pounding hard enough to make me feel sick. Then I heard it, a rustle maybe 30 feet from the tent. Then a shuffle, something moving again, but slow, careful, like it was trying not to be noticed. I froze. Every instinct I had told me not to make a sound. I didn't move. The rustling kept going, circling a little, like whatever it was moving around the edge of the clearing. I held my breath and counted the seconds between sounds. I never saw anything, but eventually, after what felt like forever, the noise faded deeper into the trees. I didn't sleep after that. I just sat upright in the tent with the light off, listening. The sounds of the forest slowly came back. The wind, the stream, the bugs. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, had been out there watching. Morning came slowly. I stepped outside the tent as soon as the light turned the sky gray, and I checked the area. I half expected to see some animal prints or claw marks, something to prove to myself that it had been a bear or something explainable. But the ground near the tent was undisturbed. No tracks, no broken branches, nothing. Still, something felt off. I told myself I was being paranoid and packed a day bag to head toward the lake I'd seen from the rock ledge. It was a few miles west through dense woods. I marked the way with sticks and bits of bright tape I kept in my bag, just in case I got turned around. The hike was rougher than I expected. Fallen trees, brush, thick spiderwebs hanging from low branches. I pushed through, dripping with sweat, just to get to that lake. When I finally made it, it was worth it. The lake was completely untouched, like a sheet of glass surrounded by dark green trees and steep ridges. No trash, no footprints. It looked like no one had camped there in years. I sat on a rock, ate lunch, and tried to relax. Then I noticed something. Across the lake, maybe 100 yards away on the opposite shore, there was a tree. It wasn't the tree itself that bothered me. It was what was hanging from it. From one of the low branches, there were 3 cans, tied with string. They were swinging lightly in the breeze. At first, I thought maybe it was a food cache, but it didn't look like it. No pack, no rope high up in the tree, just cans, hanging low. I watched them for a long time, trying to figure it out. Then I heard something behind me, a sharp, fast snap of twigs. I turned fast, but there was nothing, just forest. The noise didn't come again. Still, I felt it again, that feeling of being watched. I packed up quickly and headed back. When I returned to camp, it was late afternoon. The sky had gone from blue to that strange, hazy yellow it gets before a storm. The air felt heavy, and the wind had picked up. I made a fast dinner and decided I'd pack up first thing in the morning and hike back to the car. Something about this place no longer felt calm. It felt like I had overstayed my welcome. That night, the wind was wild, tore through the trees, made the tent fabric snap and bend. Couldn't sleep at all. The forest was loud again. Branches creaking, things thudding in the distance, leaves hissing in gusts. But somewhere in all that noise, I heard it again. That same soft sound, movement. Slow, careful, closer this time. I sat up and grabbed my flashlight. I didn't turn it on. I waited. The wind would rise and then fall, and in the lulls I could hear it. Footsteps, light, not an animal crashing through brush. These were deliberate steps. Crunch, pause, crunch, closer. This time I couldn't sit still. I unzipped the tent slowly and slipped outside, staying low. I crouched in the shadows and listened. The wind covered most of the sound, but I saw something move near the trees. A shape, human, too far to see details, but close enough to know it wasn't an animal. I held my breath. The figure didn't move like someone hiking. They weren't carrying anything. No light, just standing there, partly hidden behind a tree. Watching, I ducked back into the tent and sat in the dark, shaking. I didn't sleep. I didn't even blink for a long time, just waited. Eventually, the shape was gone. As soon as it was light, I packed everything. I barely ate. I just shoved my gear into the bag, collapsed the tent, and left. I took the same route back, but moved faster than I ever had with a pack on. Every sound in the woods made me flinch. I kept checking over my shoulder. I never saw the figure again, but I felt it, like it was behind me, just out of sight. When I reached the parking area, I expected to feel relief. But even there, the dirt lot was empty. My SUV was just how I left it, but there were no signs of other vehicles. No footprints, no tire tracks, just mine. I got in, locked the doors, and drove straight back to the city. When I got home, I unpacked everything in a daze. I didn't even want to look at my gear. I left it piled in the corner. That night, I took a long shower, turned on every light in the apartment, and sat on the couch, trying to shake the feeling that I never really liked camping much, but that didn't stop my friends from convincing me to go with them every summer. They were the kind of people who romanticized discomfort, sleeping on uneven ground, cooking over cheap stoves, swatting mosquitoes every 5 seconds, like it somehow made them more connected to nature. I usually went along just to be with them. For the most part, things went smoothly. This trip, though, was different. It was the last one I ever agreed to. There were 4 of us: me, Tyler, Evan, and Marcus. We all grew up together, but as we got older, it became harder to line up our schedules. So we planned this 1 month in advance. Tyler picked the location. He said it was in a valley about 6 hours from the city, surrounded by forested hills and a freshwater lake. No cell service, no cabins, no other people for miles. That was the appeal, real isolation. Just us, the trees, and silence. We packed light, each bringing our own gear, and met at a gas station just outside town before driving out together. The farther we got from the highway, the narrower the roads became. Eventually, we turned onto a gravel road that curved around a hill and dipped into the valley. Trees hung low over the road, their branches tapping against the car as we crept along. No signs, no tire tracks, no fences, just forest on all sides. When we arrived, it was early afternoon. We found a flat area not far from the lake to set up camp. The clearing was big enough for all our tents, and the ground was dry. There were a few fallen trees nearby that we could use for firewood. We spent the first hour pitching our tents and organizing our stuff, then started a fire and cooked an early dinner. Cheap hot dogs and canned beans, nothing fancy. The first night passed without incident. It got cold fast once the sun dipped below the hills, but we had warm sleeping bags and layers of clothing. The sounds of the forest at night were louder than I remembered. Frogs croaking, insects buzzing, the occasional snapping of branches, but nothing that felt threatening. I fell asleep easily, exhausted from the drive and the setup. The next morning, we woke up early and decided to explore the area. Tyler brought a trail map he found online, but it was vague and clearly outdated. There weren't any marked trails around, so we mostly followed deer paths and guessed our way through. The lake was beautiful, clear and still, with mist rising off the surface in the morning light. We spent hours just hiking along the shore, throwing rocks, skipping stones, and talking about nothing in particular. It was one of those rare times when everything felt calm. But later that afternoon, things started to feel off. We were maybe a mile from camp, cutting through a patch of thicker woods, when I noticed it. A strange smell, like something sour and metallic. Not overwhelming, but strong enough to notice. I figured it was a dead animal nearby. Happens all the time in the woods. But when I mentioned it, the others said they couldn't smell anything. I figured maybe it was just the way the wind was hitting me. We kept walking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to sound paranoid, but I kept glancing over my shoulder. Every time there was nothing, just trees and shadows. We got back to camp just before sunset, built another fire, ate more canned food, and stayed up late. The conversation was normal jokes, stories, complaints about work. But I was distracted the whole time. That smell came back. Not as strong, but it was there. This time, Tyler noticed it too. He made a face and asked if something had gone bad in our trash bag. Evan checked, but everything was sealed up and away from the tents. We couldn't find the source. That night was colder. The fire burned low, and we didn't bother staying up too long. One by one, we crawled into our tents. I lay there for a while, listening. I heard the usual forest sounds at first, but then I noticed something else. A soft rustling, slow and steady, like someone walking through dry leaves. Not close, but not far either. I held my breath, waiting. The sound stopped, then started again, closer this time. I sat up in my sleeping bag, heart pounding. I couldn't see anything through the walls of the tent, but I could feel that something or someone was moving out there. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and poked my head out. The fire had gone out completely, so it was almost pitch black. My eyes adjusted slowly. I didn't see anything at first, just shadows. Then, near the edge of the clearing, I caught a glimpse of something moving between the trees. It was too dark to see clearly, just a shape, maybe human, maybe not. It was gone as soon as I noticed it. I waited a few more minutes before zipping the tent back up. I didn't wake the others. I didn't even know what I'd say if I did. I lay back down, heart still racing, and eventually drifted off to sleep. In the morning, I almost convinced myself it was nothing. A dream, maybe, my imagination. But when I got out of the tent, I saw it. Footprints. Bare human footprints in the dirt, just a few feet from where I'd seen the movement. They weren't ours. I was sure of it. Too big to be Evan's or Tyler's. Too wide. And barefoot. None of us were walking around without shoes. Especially not in the dark. I called the others over and pointed it out. Tyler looked nervous. Evan tried to joke about it. Marcus stayed quiet. Nobody laughed. We talked about packing up and leaving, but it was a long hike back to the car, and the road wasn't easy. Plus, it was still early in the day. Maybe it was just a hunter or some drifter passing through, we said. We'd leave the next morning. That day, we stayed close to camp, built up the fire early, gathered wood in shifts, always making sure no one was alone. I kept scanning the treeline. Every gust of wind, every crack of a branch made me jump. That night, we didn't sleep. We sat around the fire in silence, passing around the last of the whiskey, each of us listening more than talking. Around midnight, we heard it again, rustling, closer this time, not just one spot, several, like something circling us. Then the smell came back, stronger than ever. Rot, sweat, metal. My stomach turned. We stood up, grabbed our flashlights, and aimed them into the woods. Nothing, just trees. But the rustling stopped when the lights came on. That was enough for us. We decided to keep watch in shifts, 2 up at a time while the other 2 rested. I volunteered for the first. Me and Tyler sat by the fire while Evan and Marcus went to their tents. We didn't talk, just sat there listening, watching. An hour in, something moved again, fast, just outside the ring of light. We both jumped up and swung our lights in the direction. Still nothing. I was starting to wonder if we were losing it. Too much stress, too much isolation. Then we heard it. A sound I'll never forget. A long, deep breath, like someone exhaling slowly, but with effort. It came from behind one of the trees, maybe 30 feet away. We stood frozen, lights fixed on the spot. And then it moved. A figure stepped out, only partially visible in the beam. It was tall, shirtless, dirty skin that looked smudged with mud or ash, face hidden by long, dark hair, bare feet. It didn't say anything, didn't make a sound. It just stared for a second, then stepped back into the darkness. Tyler and I woke the others and told them what we saw. Marcus wanted to leave right then. Evan said we should wait until sunrise. We argued in whispers, afraid to speak too loud. Eventually, we agreed to pack everything up as quietly as we could and hike back to the car. We didn't bother folding the tents or cleaning up. We grabbed what we could carry and left the rest. The walk back was the worst part. Every few minutes, we'd stop and listen. We kept hearing noises behind us. Branches snapping, leaves crunching. But every time we turned around, there was nothing. At one point, Evan tripped and dropped his backpack. As he picked it up, he looked behind us and froze. I asked what he saw, but he didn't answer. He just kept walking, faster now. The trail felt longer than before. The trees thicker, the air heavier. The smell didn't go away. It followed us. When we finally reached the car, it was just starting to get light. We threw everything in the trunk, slammed the doors shut, and sped off down the gravel road without a second thought. Nobody spoke. Nobody looked back. We stopped at the first gas station with signal and called the sheriff's department. They sent someone out to check the area, but we never heard anything back. No follow-up, no questions. Just silence. I don't know who or what we saw out there. Some hermit living off the grid? A guy hiding from something? Someone completely out of their mind? Maybe more than one person. Maybe a whole group. I don't know. All I know is that it was real. It happened, and I'm never going back. I still think about it sometimes. The way it just stood there, half hidden, watching. The way it didn't speak. The way it didn't have to. That slow breath still plays in my head at night. I never liked camping alone, but I kept doing it anyway. Something about it made me feel tougher than I actually was, like I was pushing back against every soft habit I'd let slip into my life. When I was younger, I used to go on trips with friends or family, but over time they all got too busy or just lost interest. I didn't. I still liked the idea of being out there with nothing but a pack, some gear, and silence. It was mid-September when I took my last solo trip. I say last not because I died or anything dramatic like that, but because I swore I'd never do it again after what happened. The spot I picked was deep in a national forest, far from any real hiking trail, in a place that didn't show up on Google Maps unless you zoomed all the way in and switched to satellite view. I had driven down an old forestry road for over an hour, my tires crunching over gravel and fallen branches, passing no other cars, no people, not even any wildlife, just trees that grew thicker the further in I went, pressing close on either side like they were watching me. Eventually, I parked in a tiny dirt clearing that barely had enough space to turn the car around. I locked it, threw my pack over my shoulders, and started hiking west, downhill toward a stream I'd seen in topo maps. The plan was to find a spot near the water, make camp, stay 2 nights, then hike a wide loop back to the car. I had no cell service, and I liked it that way. I had a paper map, a compass, and a GPS watch I trusted. I also had a small hatchet, a knife, and bear spray. I wasn't careless. I always packed carefully. The hike down was peaceful, quiet in a way that felt thick and heavy. The kind of quiet where every step on pine needles felt loud. The air was cool, crisp even, and I liked that. No bugs, no sweat, just the rhythmic sound of my boots moving downhill through scattered patches of sunlight that broke through the treetops. I found the stream about an hour and a half later. It wasn't very wide, maybe 6 feet across at its widest point, but it was clean and flowing strong. The bank on the opposite side rose up sharply into rock and brush, so I stayed on the near side and found a spot with flat, soft ground a little ways back from the edge. I cleared pine cones and branches, set up my tent, and gathered some firewood from the area. I didn't see or hear a single other person, just squirrels, birds, and wind. The first night passed without much happening. I cooked a simple meal over my small backpacking stove and sat by a fire until the stars came out. They looked unreal out there. No light pollution, no noise, just stars, forest, and the crackle of fire. I crawled into my sleeping bag early and fell asleep listening to the stream. It was around 2 a.m. when I woke up. At first, I thought it was a dream, but something had pulled me out of a deep sleep. My heart was already beating fast. I just lay there in the dark, trying to figure out what felt off. The forest was dead quiet. No wind, no stream sounds, nothing. That struck me hard, because the stream wasn't more than 40 feet away. I should have been able to hear it clearly, but it was like someone had dropped a thick wool blanket over the whole world. I sat up slowly, unzipping the sleeping bag just enough to move. I didn't turn on my flashlight. I didn't want to ruin my night vision. I just sat there listening, trying to hear something, anything. Then I heard it, a sharp crack in the woods, not far, maybe 30 feet off. The kind of sound a big branch makes when someone steps on it. Not the fall of a cone, not wind. This was pressure. Wait, I held my breath and listened harder. Another crunch. Closer. Still no wind, no animals. I reached slowly for my flashlight and switched it on. I unzipped the tent just enough to stick my head out. Nothing. Just trees, darkness, and my dying fire's orange glow throwing soft shadows across the ground. I stayed like that for almost 10 minutes, head half out the flap, light off, just listening. Whatever it was had stopped moving, or it had backed off. Eventually, I zipped the tent shut again, laid back down, and stayed wide awake until dawn, knife in hand, straining to hear every noise. Morning came slow. I made coffee, trying to shake the lingering unease. It wasn't unusual for animals to move around at night. Maybe it had been a deer, or a bear. I didn't know, but bears didn't usually walk directly toward tents at 2 in the morning. I spent the day trying to distract myself. I followed the stream a little ways north, took some photos, saw tracks, none human, and boiled water to refill my bottles. I even found a quiet clearing with a downed log and ate lunch there, watching birds flit through the trees. I started to relax again. Whatever happened last night, it was probably nothing serious. That evening, I built a better fire, arranged my gear a little more organized, and set a few large sticks leaning around the tent entrance. Not traps or anything, just enough that I'd hear something if someone or something pushed past them. I cooked dinner, read a bit from a paperback I'd packed, then lay back on my sleeping bag watching the stars again. I fell asleep faster than I thought I would. This time, I woke up just before 3 a.m., and I woke up to breathing. I don't mean soft breathing from inside the tent. I mean the heavy, slow kind of breathing that comes from lungs bigger than yours, just outside the thin nylon wall. It was steady, deep, almost like a low grunt mixed in. I didn't move. I just listened. It was right outside. I reached for the knife, which I'd left beside me this time. I didn't turn on the flashlight. I didn't want whatever was out there to know I was awake. The breathing moved, slowly, from one side of the tent to the other. I could hear the grass and pine needles crunching softly underfoot. I could hear it sniffing long, slow inhales, like it was trying to figure out what was inside. Then it stopped. Dead silence. Then I heard a low sound I can only describe as a sigh. Not a human sigh, something deeper, heavier. And then it walked away. I didn't move until the sun came up. When I finally crawled out of the tent, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. My mouth was dry, my shirt stuck to my back with sweat. I walked the perimeter of the tent, scanning the ground. At first, I didn't see anything, but then I noticed the sticks I'd placed the night before. 3 of them had been knocked aside, broken. Not chewed. Broken, like something had stepped right through them. That was enough for me. I packed up. I didn't even cook breakfast. I shoved everything into my pack, took down the tent, and filled my water bottles as fast as I could. I didn't want to be there anymore. I kept turning around as I hiked out, checking the trees, the trail behind me, listening for anything. The problem was, I hadn't marked the path well enough. I had a GPS track from the day before, but even then I must have drifted. The forest started looking the same in every direction. I walked for over 2 hours and something didn't feel right. My watch told me I was going east, but the light told me otherwise. I kept second-guessing my turns, backtracking, trying to find a familiar tree or slope, but it was all blending together. Then I found something that froze me in place. It was a plastic wrapper, bright orange, sitting right in the middle of a mossy log. The same kind of wrapper my trail mix had come in. The thing is, I hadn't stopped there. I hadn't opened that pack anywhere near this part of the forest. I picked it up. It was empty, crumpled slightly, like someone had held it and dropped it. I stood there turning in circles for a while, trying to understand what it meant. Had I looped back somehow? Was I going in circles? Or had someone else picked up my trash? I started moving faster after that. I trusted my GPS even when my gut screamed that I was wrong. I didn't care about the loop trail anymore. I just wanted to get back to the car. I followed the compass needle northeast, knowing that would lead me back to the road eventually. The problem was, the forest started thinning, then dropping down into a shallow valley filled with deadfall and thick brush. No trail, just uneven terrain and dozens of fallen trees blocking my way. I climbed over one, then another. I scraped my shin on a jagged limb. I pushed through ferns and brambles, sweating and swearing under my breath. And then I saw the cabin. It was barely a structure anymore, just a small shack, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with a sagging roof and no visible door. The wood was gray and rotting, with moss climbing halfway up the walls. It was half sunk into the slope, almost like it had been buried by time. I didn't want to go near it. Something about it felt wrong. It was too far out, too isolated. There was no reason for it to be here, but I was tired, and I needed a waypoint. I circled it at a distance of about 15 feet, checking for footprints, trails, anything that might lead me back to a path. That's when I saw the marks. Near the side of the cabin, where the ground dipped a little, there were prints. Human, barefoot, not boots, not shoes, bare feet, and they weren't old. The edges were sharp, the dirt still dark where it had been pressed down. I backed away slowly, then I heard a sound that stopped my heart. From inside the cabin, just I was 22 the summer I decided to solo camp up in the Sawtooth Range. I had taken trips with friends before, car camping, weekend hikes, even a few overnighters deep in the backcountry. But this would be the first time I did it entirely alone. No cell service, no GPS, just me, my pack, a topo map, and 3 days of supplies. I told myself it was for the challenge, to test myself, to get away from everything. But if I'm being honest, I think I just wanted to prove something to myself. That I wasn't scared of being alone. That I wasn't weak. I picked a route that looped around a set of alpine lakes, climbing up over 9,000 feet at the highest point. The trail wasn't popular, but it wasn't obscure either. Enough people passed through that I felt I could call it reasonable. It took me the better part of a day to drive to the trailhead, another 4 hours to hike into the first lake where I made camp. The terrain was beautiful, pines clustered tight together in some spots, then opening into wide meadows filled with boulders and wildflowers. Peaks jagged and sharp like broken teeth rose all around, dusted with snow even in August. That first night was quiet, too quiet almost. When you're alone out there, your ears pick up everything. Every rustle in the brush, every snap of a branch, every call of a bird or crackle of leaves makes you turn your head. I set up camp about 30 yards off the main trail, not wanting to be visible to anyone walking by. My tent was a small one-person setup, low to the ground, tucked in between a big granite slab and some lodgepole pines. I boiled water for dinner, ate in silence, and cleaned up thoroughly. I stored my food and trash in a bare canister about 50 feet away, hidden under a dead log, all by the book. I didn't sleep great that first night. I kept waking up every hour or so, mostly because the wind would pick up suddenly and make the trees creak and groan above me. There were times I thought I heard footsteps outside my tent, but every time I sat up and listened, it went quiet. No snorting or sniffing like a bear, no rapid movement like a deer bolting, just silence, and then eventually wind again. I told myself it was just tree limbs dropping or animals moving far off. I was jittery, I knew it, but that didn't make it feel any less real at the time. By morning, I felt a little better. I packed up camp and hiked the next leg of the loop. It was about 10 miles to the next lake. The trail narrowed, climbed steeply, and crossed over 2 different creeks. There were no bridges, so I had to balance across down logs and hop slick rocks to stay dry. Once or twice, I thought I heard something moving behind me in the trees, just far enough off trail that I couldn't see it. I'd stop and stare into the woods for a minute, holding my breath, but there was never anything there, just silence. Then birds chirping again like nothing happened. I reached the second lake by late afternoon. It was smaller than the first one, but more secluded, ringed tightly with rock walls and heavy trees. I didn't see anyone else the entire hike. No other tents, no hikers, not even boot prints that looked fresh. I found a flat space about 15 feet from the water, set my tent up, and made a small cooking area a little farther up the hill, where the wind could carry the smell away. I did everything right. No shortcuts, no mistakes. That night felt different. I can't explain it, but the air just had a weight to it, like the trees were pressing in. I sat in silence after dinner, watching the lake surface go from gold to dark gray to black. There were no stars. The clouds had rolled in sometime around dusk, and I couldn't even see the outline of the moon. Everything was just dim and flat and still. I couldn't hear any bugs, no crickets, no frogs. Felt wrong. I sat there until I started to feel cold. Then I packed everything into the bare canister again, made sure the fire was dead out, and crawled into my tent. I zipped it shut and laid back, fully clothed, sleeping bag halfway pulled over me. My knife was tucked into the mesh pocket on the side, just in case. I never needed it before, but that night I wanted it close. I laid there in the dark for what felt like hours. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard something outside, a stick breaking, a rustle, a faint shuffle in the brush. But I never heard anything follow up. No footsteps, no breathing, just one sound and then nothing. Around what I guessed was 2 or 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly. No noise, no wind, just something pulling me out of sleep like a cold splash of water. My heart was beating fast before I even sat up. I didn't know why. Then I realized I could smell something. It wasn't smoke or anything burning. It wasn't the trees. It was like sweat, dirty clothes and sweat and something else. Earthy, damp. The scent was faint but strong enough that it didn't belong. I'd smelled that kind of thing in cities, homeless shelters, subways, places where people hadn't bathed in days or weeks. But I was alone in the woods, 10 miles from the nearest road. I froze. I didn't move. I didn't even reach for my knife. I just laid there, every muscle in my body locked up, listening. A soft crunch, then another. Not footsteps, not really, just movement, something shifting its weight. Slowly, deliberately, I pictured a man squatting near my tent, maybe 6 feet away, just watching, breathing quietly, waiting. The scent got stronger for a second. I could feel it in the back of my throat. I started to sweat. I don't know how long I laid like that. 10 minutes, maybe 30. Eventually, whatever was out there moved away. I didn't hear anything clear, just the feeling that the smell faded, the air felt lighter, and the sounds of the forest slowly came back. A bird chirped. The wind stirred the trees. I didn't sleep after that, just laid there, staring at the ceiling of the tent until the sun came up. I packed up camp the second it was light enough to see. I didn't eat. I didn't even boil water for coffee. I just crammed everything into my pack, grabbed the bear can, and got moving. I was supposed to hike to a third lake that day before heading back out on the final stretch of the loop, but I changed my mind. I took a side trail I had passed the day before that looped back toward the parking lot. It would be longer overall, almost 17 miles out, but I wanted to be moving. I wanted to be away from that lake. The trail was rough, overgrown in places. I had to check the map constantly to stay on course. There were times I thought I was lost. The sun was out, but the clouds never cleared. Everything was washed out and gray. Even the pine needles on the ground looked dull. I kept checking over my shoulder, every 10 steps, just in case. About halfway through the day, I stopped to rest and eat. I found a fallen tree off the trail, took my pack off, and sat down with some trail mix and jerky. It was quiet, too quiet again. The forest felt heavy. That smell came back, faintly, not as strong as the night before, but there, lingering. I stood up and looked around. Nothing, just trees. I walked a slow circle around my pack, peering into the undergrowth. No movement. Then I saw it. A single boot print, in the dirt, maybe 50 feet away, just off the trail. Not mine. Too big. The tread was worn flat. I walked over, crouched down, looked at it. Definitely not mine. I hadn't seen anyone on the trail since I started. I stared into the woods in that direction for a long time. Nothing moved. I didn't finish eating. I put my pack back on and walked faster. The last few miles were rough. The trail climbed up a ridge and then dropped steeply on the other side. Loose rock, narrow switchbacks, nothing but trees and boulders. I kept my knife out in my hand the whole way. Not because I thought it would help much, but because it made me feel a little less helpless. I reached the parking lot just before sunset. My car was the only one there. Everything was quiet. The sun was low behind the peaks, painting the tops of the trees orange, but the lot itself was already in shadow. I unlocked the car, threw my gear in the back seat, and sat there for a minute before starting the engine. That's when I noticed it. Paper, tucked under the driver's side wiper. I got out, grabbed it, and opened it. It was a scrap torn from a spiral notebook. No writing, just a crude drawing. A stick figure with a big smile, and next to it, a smaller figure lying down, crossed out. I stood there for a long time, holding the paper, not moving. Then I looked around the lot, every direction, behind the outhouse, behind the trees. Nothing, not a sound. I got in the car, locked the doors, and drove. I didn't stop until I hit cell service again. I called the local ranger station and told them someone had been following me out there. I didn't tell them about the drawing. I didn't know how to explain it. They said they'd check it out. I don't know if they ever did. That was 2 years ago. I haven't been camping since. I still think about it. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I swear I can smell that same scent. Sweat, dirt, damp clothes. I don't know. We'd planned the camping trip for over a month. It was supposed to be a break, a way to get out of the routine and breathe some fresh air. The idea came from Josh, who found a spot deep in the national forest. Not one of those designated campsites with marked trails and picnic tables. No, this was backcountry, raw, quiet, and off the grid. He found it through a forum or a Reddit post or something, and once he showed us the pictures, we were all in. There were 4 of us. Me, Josh, Kevin, and Marcus. We weren't expert hikers or survivalists or anything, but we'd camped enough to know the basics. We packed smart, tents, sleeping bags, layers, water filters, a hatchet, food in bear-proof containers, even one of those little emergency satellite devices in case something went really wrong. We felt prepared. The drive out was long. We left the city early in the morning and didn't even hit the dirt road until after lunch. From there, it was another 2 hours on a rough forest road, winding through thick pines and past empty trailheads. The farther we went, the more isolated it felt. We didn't see another vehicle or person the entire drive. That was the point, though, to be completely alone, away from noise, people, everything. We parked at a small pull-off that barely fit the car. From there, we shouldered our packs and followed an unmarked trail for over an hour. It was steep in places, covered in pine needles, and narrow, barely more than a game trail. Eventually, we reached a clearing just like in the photos. A wide open area nestled in a bowl of hills, with a small creek running along one side and thick forest on all the others. No cell service, no signs of people, just us and the trees. We set up camp at the edge of the clearing where the grass was dry and flat. Kevin and I pitched our tent near the tree line, while Josh and Marcus set theirs up closer to the creek. We gathered firewood, filtered water, and started a small fire before the sun went down. Felt good, peaceful. The sky turned orange and then dark. Stars came out and we sat around the fire roasting hot dogs and talking about work, relationships, and dumb things from high school. Sometime around midnight, we all turned in. The temperature dropped quickly, and the forest around us went still. I zipped myself into my bag, listened to the wind in the trees for a while, then drifted off. I woke up sometime later, not because of a noise exactly, more like a feeling. I opened my eyes to complete darkness. I reached for my phone to check the time, but it was off, dead. I could have sworn it was charged when I went to bed, but I figured I left Bluetooth or the flashlight on or something. I lay there for a bit, listening. The forest wasn't completely quiet. There were occasional rustles in the leaves, far off. Normal stuff, a raccoon maybe. I closed my eyes again. Then I heard it, a branch snapping, close, not like a dry twig from a squirrel or something small. This was heavier, sharper. I opened my eyes again. My body tensed up without me meaning to. I didn't move, just lay there listening. Another snap, closer, then a crunch like a boot on dry leaves. I slowly turned my head to face Kevin, who was sleeping beside me. His breathing was steady and slow. I didn't want to move or speak. Something felt wrong. It was that deep gut feeling, like a warning without words. I didn't hear anything else for a while, so I finally convinced myself it was probably one of the guys going to pee in the woods. It happens. I eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, I didn't even think about it until halfway through breakfast when Josh mentioned he thought he heard someone walking outside his tent in the middle of the night. I froze. Marcus looked up from his oatmeal and said, "I thought that was you guys." Kevin shook his head. I didn't get up. None of us had. We laughed it off, made jokes about forest spirits and serial killers, but I could tell we all felt a little on edge. Still, it wasn't enough to scare us off. Not yet. We had plans to hike up the ridge that overlooked the clearing, so we packed water and snacks and headed out. The hike was tougher than we expected. The trail we followed was faint and steep, climbing through thick woods where fallen trees blocked the path every so often. We had to scramble over rocks and duck under branches. By the time we reached the ridge, we were sweaty and out of breath, but the view made up for it. You could see the whole valley below, our tents just small dots in the grass. The trees stretched out forever in every direction, a solid wall of green. It was beautiful, but also overwhelming. Out there, we were ants, tiny and alone. Anything could happen and no one would know. On the way down, we took a different route, trying to shortcut through a gully. That's when things got weird. We passed through a patch of forest where the trees were stripped bare on one side, like something had torn the bark off in strips. Claw marks maybe, but way too wide and high for any animal I knew. Marcus pointed it out, but again, we shrugged it off. Bears? We said. Big ones. Back at camp, the mood was quieter. No one said it, but we were all thinking about the night before and the trees. The air felt heavier. Still, that night we stayed up later around the fire. More wood, bigger flames. We didn't want to be in our tents just yet. When we did finally turn in, I left the rainfly off so I could see the stars and maybe hear better if anything moved. It didn't take long. Maybe an hour after we laid down, I heard movement again. But this time it wasn't just a step or two. It was steady, careful, like someone trying not to be heard. I sat up slowly and held my breath. The moonlight was just enough to see vague outlines outside the tent. I heard another footstep, then another, closer now, crunching on dry grass. I leaned toward Kevin and nudged his arm, but he didn't wake. I didn't want to make noise. I kept staring out, squinting. My heart was pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. Then I saw it, a shape, human-sized, standing at the edge of the trees maybe 15 feet away. Not moving, just standing there, watching. I stayed frozen for what felt like forever. Couldn't even blink. My skin was crawling, and my fingers went cold. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. Then, slowly, it stepped backward, into the trees and was gone. I stayed awake the rest of the night, barely breathing, eyes fixed on the same spot. Nothing else moved. In the morning, I didn't say anything. Neither did the others. But we all looked different, quiet, pale, avoiding eye contact. I think we all saw something, or heard something. We packed up early and didn't speak much as we stuffed our gear into our packs. When we finally got moving, we stuck close together. Even Josh, who always wanted to wander ahead, stayed right in the middle of the group. Halfway down the trail, Marcus stopped. He was staring at the ground. At first, I didn't see what he was looking at, but then I did. Footprints. Human footprints. Bare. Deep impressions in the soft earth, like someone had walked there recently. The toes were long, thin, and uneven, like they'd been dragging a bit. There were no shoes, no socks, just bare feet, heading uphill, toward our camp. We didn't say anything, just picked up the pace. I kept checking over my shoulder the whole way back to the car. Nothing followed us, but the woods felt different now, like something was behind every tree, just out of view. When we reached the car, Kevin fumbled the keys and dropped them in the dirt. No one laughed. We just wanted to get out of there. The drive back was silent. We didn't stop, not even for gas, until we hit a small town miles away. Only then did we talk about it. Quietly, carefully, like saying it out loud might make it real. We compared what we'd seen, what we'd heard. It wasn't just me. Marcus saw the figure too. Kevin said he'd heard breathing outside the tent, close enough that he thought it was an animal sniffing around the fabric. Josh had woken up to find his pack moved a few feet from where he left it, unzipped. We never reported it. Who would we tell? There was no crime, no damage, just fear. It's been a few years now, and I haven't camped since. Not like that, not off-grid. I stick to campsites now with bathrooms and other people, places with lights and phones that work. I still think about that night, about the figure in the trees, about those barefoot prints coming toward our camp. We'll never know who or what was out there, but I know this, it was watching us, and it wanted us to know. It started out as a simple solo camping trip. I had some time off work, and I wanted to disconnect for a while. No phones, no emails, no talking to anyone. Just me, some basic gear, and the forest. I picked a spot about 4 hours from home, near a lake that didn't get a lot of traffic. There weren't any established campgrounds, which was perfect. The fewer people, the better. I parked my car at the edge of an old dirt service road, hiked in with my backpack, and after about an hour of walking through thick trees, I found a decent clearing not too far from the lake's edge. It was late afternoon when I set up my tent. The first night went by quietly. I made a small fire, boiled some water for noodles, and sat back to enjoy the stillness. I've always liked the silence of the forest, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like a blanket over your ears. No cars, no machines, just the occasional chirp of crickets or rustle of leaves when the wind moved through. I crawled into my tent around 10, zipped up, and fell asleep listening to the sound of the lake water gently lapping at the shore. The second day, I went exploring. I followed the lake's edge for a while, hopping over rocks and fallen trees, sometimes pushing through dense patches of brush. The water was cold and clear, and at one point I sat on a big flat boulder, took off my boots, and dangled my feet in. I stayed like that for a while, not thinking about anything, just watching the sun dance across the ripples. Later, I found a narrow deer trail leading up into a thicker part of the forest. I followed it for a while until it faded into the trees. That was where I started to get the first sense that something was off. There were no sounds, no birds, no insects, not even the wind. It was the kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful. Feels unnatural, like the air itself is holding its breath. Still, I shook it off. I've been alone in the woods before, and sometimes your brain plays tricks on you. You think you hear footsteps behind you when it's just your own echo, or you feel watched when no one's there. I told myself to stop overthinking it, retraced my path, and headed back to camp before it got dark. That night, though, something changed. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of something moving outside the tent. Not wind, not a squirrel or raccoon. Something heavy. I froze, breathing shallow, listening. The steps were slow and deliberate, crunching softly through the pine needles. Not close, but close enough. I stayed perfectly still. No light, no sound. I didn't move a muscle. I don't know how long I lay there. 10 minutes, maybe more. The footsteps circled the tent, but not in a full loop. It was more like whatever it was moved halfway around and then faded into the woods. I never heard it leave completely. Eventually, I dozed off again, probably from exhaustion more than anything else. In the morning, I stepped outside and looked around. I wasn't expecting to find anything, and I didn't. The ground was too dry to hold clear tracks, and if anything had moved through, it did a good job of not disturbing the brush. I told myself it was probably a deer, maybe an elk. Something big but harmless. Maybe curious about the smell of food or the sound of the tent fabric flapping. Still, the whole thing left me on edge. I packed a small bag and went hiking again, but I couldn't enjoy it the way I had the day before. I kept turning around, looking over my shoulder, listening for footsteps that weren't there. I kept spotting shapes in the trees that looked like figures, only to blink and realize it was just bark and shadow. I didn't go far that day, maybe 2 miles out before I turned back. When I got back to camp, everything looked untouched. My pack was right where I left it. My tent was still zipped. The fire ring was cold, but that was normal. I didn't think anything of it until I went to unpack my small day bag. That's when I noticed that the knife I always kept clipped to the side was missing. It wasn't something that could have fallen off easily. It was secured through a reinforced nylon loop, tight and tucked in. I checked all around the area, even shook out my bag and coat. Nothing. I told myself I must have misplaced it, but deep down, that didn't sit right. I made a fire earlier than usual that night. I kept it going until past midnight, feeding it every few minutes, even when I wasn't cold. I didn't want to sit in the dark. Something about the night felt heavy again, like the trees were pressing in. I didn't hear any more footsteps, but I didn't sleep much either. I kept the hatchet inside the tent with me, laid beside my sleeping bag, and every time a branch snapped or an owl hooted, I flinched. I don't remember actually falling asleep, just closing my eyes and opening them to dawn. I made the decision that morning to pack up and leave early. My trip was supposed to last another 2 days, but it wasn't worth it. Something felt wrong. It wasn't fear exactly. It was a deep, uneasy feeling in my gut, like I wasn't supposed to be there anymore, like I'd overstayed my welcome. As I packed my tent, I noticed something small and strange. About 20 feet from where I'd been sleeping, stuck into the soft trunk of a tree, was a small piece of cloth. I walked over and saw that it was a torn strip of gray fabric, tied around a stubby, broken branch like a flag or a marker. It hadn't been there before. It looked fresh, not weathered or faded, just a simple strip like someone had ripped it from a shirt or pants. I stared at it for a while. No reason to be there. No hikers in this area. No trails, no paths. I took it down and tossed it in the fire ring without lighting anything. The hike back to the car was slower. I kept stopping to listen, turning around, checking behind me. Once, I was sure I saw movement, a flicker between 2 trees, but when I stopped and stared, nothing was there. I reached the car by noon and felt instant relief when I saw it untouched. The drive back was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. I just stared out at the road, one hand gripping the steering wheel a little too tight. For days afterward, I kept thinking about that strip of cloth. It didn't make sense. Neither did the footsteps or the missing knife. I cleaned all my gear when I got home, and I checked again for the knife. Never found it. I looked up missing persons reports in the area, old stories, animal attacks, anything. But there wasn't much. A couple of hiker accidents over the years, but nothing that matched what I experienced. Still, something stuck with me. It wasn't what I saw. It was what I felt. That sense of being watched. Not like an animal would watch. Something different. Something that waits. Something that wants you to feel its presence just enough to unsettle you but not enough to make you run. It wanted me on edge. And it got exactly that. Weeks passed and I moved on. Mostly. But I started noticing things. Little things. Like objects in my apartment being slightly out of place. My front door lock feeling stiff like it had been tampered with. Once, I found a faint boot print near the back window, in the dirt where no one should have been. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just leftover nerves from being in the woods. But paranoia doesn't unscrew light bulbs. It doesn't leave damp pine needles on your doorstep when you live in the city. And it doesn't bring your missing knife back and place it neatly on your kitchen table without a note, without a sound, without explanation. I stared at that knife for a long time when I found it. Same blade, same notch in the handle from when I dropped it on a rock a year ago. I hadn't seen it since that third day in the woods. I picked it up, checked the edge. Clean. No fingerprints but mine. That night I didn't sleep. I sat up in the dark, every light off, holding that knife and listening for sounds outside my window. But nothing came, and maybe that's the worst part, because it means it already did. It started off as one of those trips I almost bailed on. Work had drained me all month. I hadn't been sleeping well, and my back was acting up again. But I told myself a weekend out in nature might be what I needed, just to disconnect, breathe in some clean air, and sleep under the stars. I threw my gear in the truck Friday morning and drove 3.5 hours east to a state forest I'd never been to before. A guy I worked with had told me about it once. Said it was peaceful, less trafficked than the popular spots. That sounded perfect to me. The drive was easy enough. Once I left the main roads behind and started winding through smaller routes, the scenery got better. Trees stretched over the road like a tunnel in places. I passed a few scattered cabins, a broken-down gas station that probably hadn't been open in years, and not much else. Cell signal dropped to 0 before I even turned off the final gravel road into the forest. I had printed directions just in case, so I followed the route up to a small parking lot that could barely fit 4 cars. Only one other vehicle was there when I arrived, a dusty old Jeep with out-of-state plates. I didn't think much of it. I geared up, locked the truck, and set out on foot. My plan was simple. Hike in about 6 or 7 miles to a lake I'd marked on the map, make camp, and spend the weekend just relaxing. Maybe a little fishing, maybe just walking around. No phone, no work, no responsibilities. The trail was well marked for the first few miles. Hard-packed dirt, a few switchbacks, nothing crazy. The woods were dense and quiet. It had rained the day before, so the smell of wet pine and soil was strong, clean. A couple hours in, I noticed the trail becoming rougher. Fewer signs, a little more overgrowth. I didn't mind. In fact, I kind of liked it. The more remote, the better. At around 4 p.m., I reached the lake. It wasn't huge, but it was beautiful. Crystal clear, ringed by tall trees, with a small pebble shore on one end and rocky ledges on the other. I walked the perimeter and found a small clearing a little ways uphill, about 50 yards back from the water. Flat ground, soft with pine needles. Good spot for the tent. I set up camp quickly, just my one-person tent, a sleeping pad and bag. I got a little fire going using some dry sticks under the trees and filtered water from the lake to fill my bottle. As the sun dipped lower, I sat on a fallen log and ate a quick meal from a pouch. The quiet out there was total. No hum of cars, no distant chatter, just wind in the trees and the occasional bird call. That first night, I slept surprisingly well. I woke up a few times, which is normal for me when I camp, but nothing felt off. Just the usual night sounds, branches shifting, maybe a squirrel rustling in the brush. I slept until just after sunrise and made coffee using my little stove. Sat by the lake, just watching the morning mist burn off the water. Most of the day, I just wandered. No real trail, just walking through the woods, trying to be quiet. I saw deer a couple times. Found a few old tracks near the shore, probably raccoon or maybe a fox. Around mid-afternoon, clouds started to roll in. The sky darkened a bit, and I felt a drop or two of rain. Nothing serious, just enough to make the air thick. I got back to camp early and gathered more wood, just in case the rain picked up. I built up a better fire ring, laid out some bigger logs to dry by the fire, and prepped dinner. As night fell, the rain never came. The clouds just hung there, heavy and unmoving. I sat by the fire again, staring into the flames, completely still. That's when I first noticed something strange. It was subtle at first, just the sense that the woods were too quiet. No wind, no bird calls, nothing. I remember shifting a little, glancing behind me. I thought maybe a larger animal was nearby, maybe a bear or a mountain lion. I didn't see anything, but the stillness got under my skin. Around 10 p.m., I turned in. I zipped up the tent, slid into my bag, and turned off my headlamp. Took a while to fall asleep this time. I kept thinking I heard movement outside the tent, soft steps, crunches in the brush. But every time I sat up to listen, it went silent again. I told myself it was probably a deer or raccoons. I forced my eyes closed. At some point, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, I woke up suddenly. No noise, just that feeling like something wasn't right. My heart was beating hard, and I didn't know why. I laid there, completely still, listening. Then I heard it, barely a sound, but it was there. Something moving slowly outside the tent. Not crashing through the brush, more like stepping. One step, then a pause. Another step. It sounded too heavy to be a deer. I stayed still, holding my breath. I didn't want to move or make a sound. My bear spray was clipped to my pack, which was outside, hanging from a tree to keep animals away. I felt completely exposed. After a few minutes, the steps faded away. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When the sun rose, I got out of the tent, tense and jumpy. I checked the area around camp. Nothing obvious. No prints I could see, no disturbed brush. But I knew I'd heard something. I debated hiking out that morning, but I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was an animal or even the wind playing tricks. I decided to stay one more night, but I kept my gear packed up, just in case. That day was a lot less relaxing. I kept checking my surroundings, looking behind me every few minutes. I walked down to the far end of the lake, trying to shake the feeling. That's when I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. On the opposite shore, maybe 100 yards away, there was something hanging from a tree. At first, I thought it was a game camera or maybe trash. But when I looked through my binoculars, my stomach dropped. It was a small bundle of twigs and moss tied together with what looked like fishing line or string, hanging about 6 feet off the ground. It wasn't natural, and it wasn't there yesterday. I stayed frozen, staring at it. It reminded me of those things people make and hang in trees in movies, like a signal or a warning. I don't know. I lowered the binoculars and scanned the trees around it. I didn't see anyone, but I couldn't shake the thought that someone else was out there, watching. I backed away from the lake slowly and made my way back to camp. I didn't run, but I wanted to. I didn't even light a fire that night. I ate cold food from my pack, zipped myself into the tent before dark, and kept my headlamp off. I laid there with my knife in one hand and the can of bear spray in the other, eyes wide open. Around midnight, the noises started again. Same as before, soft, careful steps. Only this time, it didn't stop. The steps moved around the tent, sometimes close, sometimes further back. I didn't dare move. I tried to control my breathing. My muscles were cramping from staying so still, but I didn't care. Then something touched the side of the tent. Not a paw, not an animal rooting around. This was a hand or something like it, pressing lightly against the fabric. Just once. Then it was gone. I don't know how long I laid there. Eventually, I must have drifted off. When I woke up, the sun was already high. I burst out of the tent, looked around, nothing. But right at the edge of the clearing, I found something new. A small pile of rocks, stacked neatly. 5 stones balanced carefully, that hadn't been there before. I packed everything in 10 minutes. Threw my tent, gear, food, everything into my pack. I didn't even bother with breakfast. I just wanted out. The hike back felt endless. Every sound made me jump. At one point, I heard a branch snap directly behind me. I turned so fast I nearly fell. Nothing was there, but I didn't stop moving. When I finally saw the parking lot, I felt a wave of relief so strong it made me lightheaded. I half-jogged the rest of the way to the truck, dumped my gear in the bed, and climbed in. I locked the doors before I even started the engine. I looked around once more. The Jeep that had been parked there before was gone. No other vehicles. No signs of anyone. I drove away without looking back. I didn't tell anyone the full story when I got home. I just said the weather turned bad, and I cut the trip short. For weeks after, I kept thinking about the sounds, the figure outside the tent, the thing in the tree. I tried to find logical explanations. Maybe some backwoods hiker playing a prank. Maybe I was just overtired, my mind filling in blanks. But the rock pile, the hand against the tent, that was real. Months passed. I stopped camping solo. I stayed local, well-traveled trails only. I still love the woods, but I don't trust the deep, silent parts anymore. Sometimes, late at night, I think about whoever or whatever was out there with me. I wonder if they watched me arrive, if they followed me through the trees, if they waited each night, just beyond the firelight, deciding how close to come. And the part that keeps me up sometimes, the part one try not to dwell on, is this: I think they wanted me to know they were there, not to hurt me, not right away, just to let me feel. It was supposed to be a simple weekend, nothing crazy, just a 2-day camping trip to clear my head and get away from the noise. I'd been working long shifts for weeks without a proper break, and I felt like I was losing my mind a little bit. The city had this way of eating at me slowly. Sirens at night, neighbors fighting through the walls, traffic, deadlines, people constantly moving and talking and pulling energy from you whether you wanted them to or not. So I packed light, just the basics: tent, sleeping bag, food for 2 days, water filter, fire starter, knife, flashlight, power bank, and a paperback book I'd been meaning to read for months. I picked a spot about 3 hours from where I lived, a state forest I hadn't visited before. It wasn't completely remote, but it wasn't one of those places with reserved campsites and running water either. More like you find a flat piece of ground, you set up camp, and you leave it the way you found it. That's what I wanted. Someplace quiet, unmarked, off the beaten path. I arrived around 2 in the afternoon. It was late summer, warm but not hot, with that golden kind of sunlight that hits different in the woods. I parked off a dirt access road where a fire road branched off, locked the car, slung my pack on, and hiked about 2 miles in until I found a small clearing, just big enough for one tent and a fire pit, surrounded by tall pines and thick underbrush. There were signs someone had camped there before. A ring of blackened rocks, some melted foil in the ashes, and a few broken branches where maybe someone had tied a tarp. But no trash, no footprints. It looked unused for a while, which was fine by me. I set up the tent, laid out my gear, and gathered wood. By 5 p.m., I had a small fire going and water boiling for a cup of instant coffee. I sat on a flat rock, legs stretched out, holding the warm cup, listening to the quiet. Real quiet, not silence, but birds calling, wind through branches, the occasional crack of something far off moving through brush. That kind of quiet makes you realize how loud the rest of your life is. I ate a protein bar, read a few chapters of my book, then stretched out by the fire as the sun dipped low. I wasn't in a rush to sleep, but I also wasn't planning on staying up late. Around 8:30, the woods started to get that deep, shadowy look. Everything turned blue and gray, and the birds went quiet. That's when I first noticed it, the sense that something was off. Not wrong, just different, like the air had changed. I kept looking over my shoulder at the trees. Nothing moved, nothing made a sound, but I felt it, that uneasy stillness. I figured it was just nerves. First solo trip in a while. I threw a few more sticks on the fire, watched the flames pop, then decided to call it a night. I put the fire out fully, poured water, stirred the ashes, poured more water. My dad drilled that into me young. Never leave a fire unless it's cold to the touch. I climbed into my tent, zipped it up, peeled off my boots, and crawled into my bag. I checked my phone, no service as expected, and then used the flashlight to scan the tent one more time. Everything looked normal. I turned off the light and laid there, eyes open in the dark, listening. At first, all I heard was the faint rustle of leaves, maybe a squirrel or something running through brush, then nothing. And then, I swear, I heard something else, a very faint thud, like a footstep, then another, and then silence again. I lifted my head, ears straining. I thought it might just be a deer, or even just my imagination. I stayed still, listening. Nothing. After a while, I told myself it was probably just a branch falling or some animal passing by. I eventually drifted off. I woke up once in the middle of the night. No sound, no wind. I lay there with my eyes open, heart beating harder than it should have been. I didn't know why I was awake. Something had pulled me out of sleep, but I didn't know what. I didn't move. I just listened. Then far off I heard it again. That thud. Then a rustle. Then another thud. Not loud, not heavy, but just wrong, like someone trying to move quietly, but stepping on dry leaves. I sat up slowly and grabbed the flashlight. I didn't turn it on yet. I waited. The sound didn't come again. Eventually, I laid back down, clutching the light in my hand, and waited for sleep. It didn't come easy. I think I finally passed out sometime around 3 a.m. When I woke again, it was morning. Pale light coming through the nylon walls. I sat up, unzipped the tent, and stepped out. It was cool and damp. My fire pit looked untouched. My gear was all there, nothing obviously disturbed, but I still felt weird, like my skin didn't fit right. I walked the perimeter of the clearing, scanning the ground. I didn't see anything unusual until I stepped around the far edge where the trees were tighter. There, in the soft dirt, was a footprint. Not an animal, a boot, big too, bigger than mine. It was pressed deep into the dirt and pointing toward my camp. Only one, though, no matching print behind or in front of it. I stood there for a while, staring at it. My mind tried to explain it away. Maybe it was old. Maybe it was mine from the day before. But I knew it wasn't. I hadn't walked that far into the brush, and my boots had a different tread. I didn't pack up right then. I wanted to get the hell out, but I didn't want to panic. I told myself it didn't mean anything. One footprint doesn't mean danger, but that unease I'd felt the night before was back and stronger now. I spent the rest of the day exploring around the area but staying close. I didn't find any more tracks, no sign of people. I didn't hear anything strange. I even started to feel a little silly. I sat by the fire again that evening, had another coffee, and tried to settle my nerves. But I didn't sleep well that night either. The forest was loud, bugs, owls, wind, but it felt like something was just outside of where the firelight would reach, like the trees were hiding something. I stayed in my tent, eyes wide open, gripping my flashlight like a weapon. At one point, I heard something scrape, a light scraping like fabric on bark. Then silence. No footsteps this time. Just that faint brush of movement. I sat up fast, clicked the flashlight on, and scanned the inside of my tent. Then I unzipped the flap just an inch and peeked out. The fire was low but still glowing. I couldn't see anything, just black trees and my gear pile. I didn't sleep after that. As soon as the sun was up, I packed everything. Fast. No breakfast, no coffee. I threw my bag over my shoulders, stomped out the fire pit again just to be safe, and took off down the trail, heart pounding the whole way. I don't think I looked over my shoulder more than twice the entire first day I hiked in. That morning, I looked back every few seconds. When I got to the car, everything was where I left it. No broken windows, no sign anyone had been near it. I unlocked the door, tossed my gear in, and sat down behind the wheel, hands shaking a little. I didn't start the engine right away. I sat there, staring through the windshield at the empty road. And then I saw it. Across the fire road, where the trees started up again, there was a tree with something hanging from it. Not high, just at eye level. I squinted, leaned forward. It was a bundle, tied with twine, maybe 5 sticks wrapped tightly together with what looked like black hair caught in the knot. Not animal fur, hair, human hair, short, like someone had cut it. It was tied to the branch like an ornament. I just stared at it. I didn't get out. I didn't take a picture. I just started the engine, turned around, and drove. On the way back, I kept checking the rearview mirror. Not because I thought someone was chasing me, but because I couldn't stop thinking about that footprint, and the scraping sound, and the bundle with the hair. I didn't tell anyone about it for a while. What would I say? That I heard some noises and saw a footprint? People camp alone all the time. Maybe someone else was out there hunting or just hiking. Maybe the bundle was some weird art project or a joke. Maybe I was tired and just paranoid. But it didn't feel that way. It felt like someone had been watching me. Not by accident. Not just passing through. They had stood at the edge of my camp, close enough to make a sound. Close enough to leave one footprint. Close enough to leave something behind after I'd gone. And they didn't come close to talk or to share a fire. They stood in the trees and they waited, quiet, watching, close enough that if I hadn't turned on the light, if I hadn't stayed awake, maybe they would have done more than just watch. I haven't been camping alone since, not because I'm afraid of the woods. I'm not. The woods are what they are, raw and real. But people, the ones who stay quiet, who don't make a sound until you're half asleep. The ones who don't leave a message, just a single footprint and a strange bundle tied in hair. I don't trust people like that, and I don't think that person was just passing through. It was supposed to be just a weekend escape. I had been working long hours for months and hadn't taken a proper break in a long time. My body felt tired, but it was my mind that really needed the rest. I needed to get away from screens, phones, cars, people, everything. I wanted silence. Not the kind you find in your room with the fan on or cars buzzing outside your window. Real silence. The kind that presses against your ears and reminds you that the world is bigger than you. So I planned a solo camping trip. I chose a spot deep in a national forest. I'd found it while scanning through online trail maps and reading reviews on backcountry forums. It wasn't an official campsite, just a clear patch of land a few miles off a rarely used trail. From what I read, it was peaceful and rarely visited. That's exactly what I wanted. I packed all the basics: tent, sleeping bag, food, water filter, first aid kit, map, compass, headlamp, bear spray, small knife, and a power bank just in case. I made sure to bring extra batteries, a warm jacket even though it was summer, and enough supplies to last 4 days. I planned to hike out Friday morning, set up camp by afternoon, stay until Monday morning, and be back at my car by midday. I didn't tell many people exactly where I was going, just left a rough plan with a friend, trail name, expected return time, general area. That way, if something went wrong, someone would at least know where to start looking. The drive out there took about 5 hours. The last hour was on gravel and dirt roads, winding through dense forest and climbing in elevation. I didn't see another car the entire time. I parked at the small trailhead, double-checked that I had everything, locked my car, and set off. The trail started off easy. Birds were chirping. The sun was filtering through the trees, and everything smelled fresh. That smell of pine, dirt, and something wild. I walked at a steady pace, sweat slowly soaking through the back of my shirt. After about 2 hours, the trail got steeper and narrower. The kind of path where if you didn't watch your step, you could slip and roll an ugly way down the hill. The terrain was mostly forested, but every now and then, there were small open areas where you could see for miles, nothing but hills and green. After nearly 4 hours of hiking, I reached the clearing. It was exactly like the photos online. A flat patch of earth surrounded by trees, maybe 60 feet across. One side had a slight slope, leading to a stream maybe 20 yards down. I could hear the water flowing faintly. No sign of anyone having camped there recently, no trash or trampled grass. It felt untouched. I took my pack off and stood there for a minute, letting my back stretch and my legs breathe. Then I got to work. I set up my tent near the edge of the clearing, not too close to the trees, but not out in the wide open either. I used rocks to anchor the corners and laid my sleeping bag out inside. I got a small fire going using a fire ring someone had built long ago, just a circle of stones with a shallow pit in the center. I boiled water, made a quick meal, and sat back on a log to eat. The quiet was everything I had hoped for. No hum of electricity, no distant traffic, no voices, just the fire crackling, birds in the distance, and the occasional breeze moving through the branches above. As the sun started to go down, the temperature dropped fast. I put on my jacket and watched the colors in the sky fade from orange to purple to black. I didn't make a big fire, just enough to warm myself and light up the space around me a little. When it was time to sleep, I poured water on the fire, stirred the ashes, and poured more water to be sure. I got into my tent, zipped it closed, and laid down. I listened for a while, hearing the sound of the stream, the distant snap of branches as animals moved through the woods. Normal stuff. I woke up once around 2 a.m. to pee. The moon was out, bright enough to light up the clearing without a flashlight. Everything looked calm. I didn't hear or see anything unusual. I went back to sleep easily. The next day followed the same rhythm. I hiked a bit, gathered more firewood, took a nap, read a little, cooked, just relaxed. The kind of deep relaxation you don't get in the city. That night, I made a slightly bigger fire, sat by it longer, watched the flames dance, and thought about nothing in particular. I slept even better that night. The third day, though, things started to shift. Started small. While I was walking near the stream collecting water, I thought I saw something move behind a tree. I stopped and watched for a while, but nothing came out. Could have been a deer, I told myself. There were tons of animals in these woods. It didn't bother me much. But later, when I was back at camp preparing dinner, I realized I hadn't heard any birds for a while. The silence felt different, not peaceful, heavy, like something was watching me. I shrugged it off as overthinking. I was out there alone, after all. It's normal for your brain to play tricks. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd snap them open again, feeling like someone had just whispered something nearby. I kept thinking I heard movement in the trees. Small sounds at first, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, but they didn't stop. Usually, forest sounds are random. One here, one there. These came in patterns. A step, pause, another step, like something was circling. I unzipped my tent a couple times and looked around. My fire was out. The moon was behind clouds, so it was hard to see anything clearly. I thought about lighting another fire, but decided against it. If it was just an animal, I didn't want to scare it and make it run into my tent. If it was something else, I didn't know. I laid there listening, trying not to breathe too loud. At some point, I must have drifted off, but it wasn't restful. My dreams were full of shadows and running and something just behind me that I never saw. I woke up with the sun. Everything looked normal. Birds were singing again. Squirrels rustled in the bushes. But I felt different. I had that tight feeling in my stomach that you get before something bad happens. I checked around my camp. Nothing looked disturbed, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I thought about hiking back early, but I kept telling myself I was being silly. I'd come all the way out here to disconnect, to prove to myself I could still be alone with nature. If I left now, I'd feel like I'd failed. So I decided to stay, just one more night. That afternoon, I stuck closer to camp. I didn't want to hike too far. I kept scanning the trees, listening, watching, but everything seemed fine. I made dinner early, got a decent fire going, and tried to settle my nerves. I didn't want to be paranoid. I didn't want to ruin my trip by being afraid of nothing. But I still kept my knife within reach. As the sun dropped, that silence came back. I don't know how to describe it clearly. It wasn't just quiet. It was wrong, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Even the stream sounded further away. I didn't want to go in the tent. I wanted to see what was around me, so I sat by the fire longer than usual. I kept turning around, checking the dark edges of the clearing. Every time I thought I heard something, I'd freeze and listen, but it always stopped. Eventually, the fire started dying. I didn't want to move to get more wood. I was afraid that whatever was out there was just waiting for me to move. I sat there still for what felt like hours. At some point, I gave up and went inside the tent. I left the zipper halfway so I could peek out, just in case. I laid in my sleeping bag with my eyes wide open, knife in one hand, bear spray in the other. The forest stayed dead silent. I didn't hear anything moving, but somehow that was worse. Then I heard it. A single heavy step. Not near, maybe 20 feet away. Then another. Same direction. Not rushing, just walking. I didn't breathe. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. Step. Pause. Step. It sounded like someone. Person. Not an animal. Animals move differently. Faster. Less careful. This was slow. Deliberate. I stayed completely still. My muscles locked up. My fingers hurt from gripping the knife so tightly. The steps got closer, then stopped. I waited. I don't know how long. 10 minutes? 30? Nothing happened. No sound. No movement. I started to think maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was a branch falling. Then I heard something right outside the tent. A slow breath. Not an animal breath. Not panting or snorting. Just breathing. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I was sure it could hear my heart. Then something brushed the side of the tent. Not a paw. A hand. I swear it felt like fingers. I nearly pissed myself. It didn't say anything. It didn't do anything else. Just stood there, breathing, for what felt like forever. Then the sound of slow steps again. Walking away. No rush. No panic. Just fading into the trees. I stayed frozen until the first light of dawn. When I finally unzipped the tent and stepped out, everything looked I had been planning this solo camping trip for months. It wasn't supposed to be anything complicated. Just a 3-day hike through a forest preserve about 5 hours from where I lived. I'd done longer trips before, even some alone, but this one felt different for some reason. Not in a mystical way or anything like that. Just heavier. I think I just needed to get out. I was tired of the city, of people, of noise. My job had been killing me slowly, and I wanted to go somewhere I couldn't hear a damn thing except birds and trees. The drive up was uneventful. I left before sunrise to beat traffic, and by the time I reached the small gravel pull-off near the trailhead, the morning fog had just started to burn off. I parked my truck, locked it, threw on my pack, and stood there for a minute, breathing in the air. It had that rich smell of pine needles, dirt, and something slightly damp. Maybe mushrooms or just old, wet wood. Either way, it was good. It was quiet. The trail was narrow and a little overgrown in places, but I didn't mind. I had marked out a route on my GPS and printed a physical map too, just in case. I planned to make a loop about 20 miles in total, cutting through a remote section of forest, camping somewhere around the halfway point. I figured I'd pitch my tent near a small stream I had seen marked on the topo map. By late afternoon, I had been hiking for hours. The trail had narrowed to the point that it was more of a suggestion than a path, but I still felt confident. The deeper I went, the fewer signs of people I saw. That was what I wanted. No trash, no wrappers, no boot prints, just nature. Still, I was getting tired, and my legs were starting to feel heavy. I knew I had to be getting close to the stream, so I kept pushing forward. When I finally saw the glint of water through the trees, I felt relieved. The stream wasn't huge, maybe 10 feet across in its widest spots, but it was clean, and it ran clear over smooth rocks and fallen branches. I found a flat area nearby, just up a small incline, that seemed perfect for the tent. I cleared away a few sticks, took off my pack, and started setting up camp. The sun was starting to dip below the treetops by the time I got the tent up and the fire going. I made dinner, just a simple dehydrated meal and a cup of instant coffee, and sat on a log watching the flames crackle. I didn't bring a phone or anything. No signal out here anyway. I just sat, listening to the sounds of the forest around me. A few insects chirping, the water trickling over rocks, leaves rustling in the breeze. Nothing else. Eventually, I turned in for the night. I had a good sleeping bag and a solid pad. and the air was cool but not cold. I zipped up the tent and lay there in the dark, staring at the fabric above me. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. It was sometime in the middle of the night when I woke up. At first, I didn't know why. There wasn't any noise, no flashlights or footsteps, but I felt strange. Not scared exactly, just on edge. My ears were straining, trying to pick something up. I lay there motionless, barely breathing. Then I heard it. It was soft at first. A crunch. Leaves, maybe. Then nothing. Then again, another crunch. A slow, deliberate step. It wasn't an animal. I've spent enough time in the woods to know what deer or raccoons sound like. This wasn't that. It was something heavier and slower. I sat up quietly and reached for my flashlight. I didn't turn it on. I just held it, listening. The sound came again, closer now. Still slow, still deliberate. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and peeked out. I didn't see anything at first, just trees and darkness. The moon was out, so there was some light, but not much. I waited. Then, just beyond the stream, maybe 30 or 40 feet away, I saw movement. A figure, tall, upright. Not a bear, not a deer, a man. He wasn't carrying a light, and he wasn't walking on the trail. He was slowly making his way through the trees, moving parallel to the stream, not towards me. He didn't look over. He didn't say anything. He just kept walking, one slow step after another, until he was out of sight. I stayed there frozen for a long time, just watching the darkness where he had disappeared. My heart was pounding. I wasn't even sure what I had seen. Could have been a hiker, I told myself. Maybe someone who got lost. Maybe someone else camping. But something about the way he moved, slow, deliberate, almost too slow, made my skin crawl. He hadn't looked around. He hadn't stumbled. He just walked, like he already knew where he was going, like he belonged out here. Eventually, I zipped the tent back up and lay down again. I didn't sleep much after that. Every sound made me flinch. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. By morning, everything felt normal again. Birds chirped. The stream flowed. The trees swayed gently. I tried to shake it off. I packed up camp quickly, ate a protein bar for breakfast, and got back on the trail. I wanted to finish the loop as soon as possible and get back to the truck. The next stretch of trail was rough. Lots of elevation gain, thick underbrush, and downed trees. I kept thinking about the man I saw, if it even was a man. The image kept flashing in my head. The way he moved. The way he didn't make a sound except for those few deliberate steps. By mid-afternoon, I was exhausted. I hadn't eaten much and I hadn't slept well. I started making stupid mistakes, tripping on roots, taking wrong turns. At one point, I realized I had wandered off the trail completely. I checked my GPS, but the signal was weak and spotty. I could see where I was, but the trail wasn't showing up clearly anymore. I tried to backtrack, but everything looked the same: trees, ferns, moss-covered logs. Panic started to rise in my chest. I took a deep breath and told myself to calm down. I had a compass. I had a map. I wasn't far from the loop trail. I just had to head west and I'd cross it eventually. I reoriented myself and started walking. About an hour later, I still hadn't found the trail. My water was running low, and I was starting to feel lightheaded. Then I smelled smoke. It wasn't strong, but it was there, just a faint scent of burning wood. I followed it, hoping maybe someone else was camping nearby. Maybe I could ask for help or at least directions. After another 10 minutes, I saw it, thin wisps of smoke rising through the trees. I moved slowly, carefully, not wanting to startle whoever was there. When I got closer, I saw a campsite, a small fire pit with glowing embers, a makeshift lean-to made of branches and a tarp. No tent, no gear, just the lean-to, the fire, and something else that made me stop cold. Hanging from one of the trees was a rope, and tied to the rope, swaying gently in the breeze, was a small bundle of bones. Animal bones, cleaned and strung together like some kind of ornament. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding again. Something about the camp felt wrong. It wasn't just the bones. It was the silence. The fire was still warm. Someone had been here very recently, but there was no backpack, no food, no sleeping bag. Nothing you'd expect from a normal camper. I turned around and started walking quickly, almost jogging. I didn't care if I was going the right way anymore. I just wanted to get away from there. The forest seemed darker now. The light filtering through the trees had a strange quality to it, dim, muted. Every twig that snapped underfoot made me flinch. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone following me, but I never did. Eventually, I reached a ridgeline and saw the glint of a lake in the distance. I remembered it from the map. If I could make it there, I could reorient myself and find the main trail again. The descent to the lake was steep and treacherous. Loose rocks, slick mud, and sharp branches all made it feel like I was crawling more than walking. I slipped a few times, scraping my hands and knees, but I didn't stop. When I reached the lake, I knelt at the edge and drank deeply from my bottle. Then I checked the map again, using the lake's shape to figure out my position. I had veered almost a mile off the loop trail, but I knew now how to get back. It took another few hours, but I finally stumbled back onto the trail just as the sun was starting to set. I didn't stop to rest. I kept walking, pushing myself to go as far as I could before dark. That night, I didn't set up camp. I found a flat spot just off the trail, rolled out my sleeping bag, and lay there with my knife in my hand. I didn't make a fire. I didn't eat. I just lay there, staring at the dark sky, waiting for morning. Nothing happened that night. No footsteps, no voices, just silence. The next day, I made it back to the trailhead around noon. My truck was still there, undisturbed. I unlocked it, threw my pack in the bed, and sat behind the wheel for a long time before starting the engine. Driving back felt surreal. I passed towns, gas stations, people going about their lives like nothing had happened. And to them, nothing had. Just me, alone in the woods, seeing things I couldn't explain and feeling a kind of fear. I've gone camping my whole life. I grew up in northern Idaho, where the mountains aren't just a backdrop. They're part of how you grow up. My dad used to take me fishing before I was even old enough to hold a pole on my own. By the time I was 15, I was comfortable pitching a tent by myself, starting a fire, and gutting a trout without flinching. I loved the quiet, the way sound carries in the forest, how the trees seem to watch you without judgment. It always felt like a second home, so I didn't think twice when I planned a solo trip for late September. I had a few vacation days saved up and wanted to get away from everything. Work, my phone, traffic, people. Just a few days off the grid. I picked a spot I'd been to before, but only with friends. A lake deep in the woods, about 9 miles in from the closest trailhead. It wasn't on any official map. Some guy at the sporting goods store had told my dad about it years ago, and we'd all hiked in once when I was a teenager. I remembered it being peaceful, untouched. No cabins, no other campers, just water, trees, and silence. The morning I left, the sky was dull and gray, the kind of light that makes it hard to tell what time it is. I loaded up my truck, checked my gear, and drove out toward the trailhead. I left a note with a friend saying where I'd be, just in case, but I wasn't worried. I'd hiked worse trails. This one was overgrown in spots but manageable. I reached the trailhead just before noon and started walking. The air smelled like pine needles and damp earth. It had rained a few days earlier, so the ground was soft under my boots. The first few miles were easy, quiet. No other cars in the lot meant I had the trail to myself. By mile 4, I'd settled into a rhythm, breathing steady, arms swinging with the weight of my pack. Around mile 6, the trail narrowed and dipped into a small ravine. That part had always been a bit tricky. There were loose rocks and roots everywhere, and if you weren't careful, it was easy to slip. I slowed down and took my time. Somewhere off to the left, I heard a branch snap, and I froze for a second. Not out of fear, just instinct. I scanned the woods but didn't see anything. Probably a deer. Could have been a squirrel. The forest is always making noise. You learn not to jump at every sound. I reached the lake just before sunset. The clouds had started to clear, and the air had that sharp chill that means fall is coming fast. The lake was still, not a ripple on the surface. Trees circled the water like a wall, thick and dark. I picked a flat spot near the edge and set up my tent. I got a small fire going and cooked a quick dinner, beans and rice with some jerky torn up in it. I sat on a rock near the water and watched the sun disappear behind the ridge. That first night was uneventful, cold but not unbearable. I zipped up in my sleeping bag and drifted off to the sound of frogs and the occasional crack of a twig outside. Normal forest stuff. I've always been a light sleeper, especially when camping alone, but I didn't wake up once that night. The next day was colder. My breath came out in white puffs, and the ground had a layer of frost on it when I unzipped the tent. I boiled water for coffee and ate a granola bar while watching the sun rise. I spent the morning walking the perimeter of the lake, just exploring. There were animal tracks along the edge, mostly deer. I saw what I thought might be a coyote print, but it was hard to tell. The mud had dried weird. I didn't think much of it. That afternoon, I hiked up a ridge to get a better view of the surrounding area. From the top, you could see for miles just endless green and the silver streak of the lake below. No roads, no power lines, nothing man-made. It was exactly what I wanted, but something started to feel off. Not all at once, just a slow itch in the back of my brain. I'd sit down to rest and feel like something was behind me. I'd turn and see nothing. I told myself it was just nerves. I wasn't used to being truly alone. Most of my solo trips were in places where you'd pass at least one other hiker or hear a plane overhead. Here, there was nothing. Total silence except for wind and birds. It should have been peaceful, but it wasn't. That night, I didn't sleep as well. I kept waking up, thinking I'd heard something. A rustle too close to the tent. A low thud, like a footstep. I turned my headlamp on a few times and looked around, but I didn't see anything. I told myself it was just an animal, a raccoon or something. I wasn't even carrying food in the tent. I knew better. The third day is when things got worse. I decided to hike down a narrow game trail I'd noticed the day before. It looked like it followed a creek down into a gulch. I figured I'd go a few miles, see if it led anywhere interesting, and be back before dark. The trail was barely a trail, just a faint line of trampled grass and bent branches. I had to duck and push through undergrowth, and more than once I thought about turning back. But I kept going. I didn't know why. It wasn't curiosity, more like something pushing me forward. I walked for maybe an hour before the trail just stopped, ended in a mess of fallen logs and thick brush. No sign of animals, no path forward. That's when I realized I couldn't hear the creek anymore. I turned around, and for the first time, I didn't recognize where I'd come from. The trees all looked the same. There were no landmarks. I retraced my steps, or thought I did, but after 20 minutes, I wasn't any closer to the lake. My chest got tight. I checked the GPS on my watch, but the signal was dead. Useless. I tried to stay calm. I wasn't lost, not really. The lake had to be uphill. I just had to climb. I started moving fast, shoving branches aside, scraping my legs on thorns. Every few minutes, I stopped to listen. Nothing, not even birds, just wind moving through the trees. Felt wrong. Then I found the pile. It was just off the trail. A stack of rocks, maybe waist-high, with pieces of broken wood jammed into the top. The wood looked like it had been burned, blackened and brittle. Around the base were bones. Not a lot, but enough. Scattered. Some small, like a rabbit. Others longer, cleaner. I stood there, staring at it, until my hands started to shake. I backed away and turned around. I didn't run, but I moved fast. No more stopping. I needed to get back to the lake. I don't know how long I walked. Time got slippery. The sun was still up, but it was low. I finally broke through the trees and saw water. Relief washed over me, but it didn't last long. It wasn't the same part of the lake. My camp wasn't there. No tent, no fire pit, just more trees and a shoreline I didn't recognize. I followed the edge of the lake, hoping to circle back to my spot, but the light was fading. The cold came back hard. My breath fogged up in front of me, and my sweat started to chill against my back. I was about to stop and make a fire when I saw something across the water. A figure, standing on the far bank, too far to make out details, but it was tall, upright, human-shaped. I froze. It didn't move, just stood there, watching. I blinked, and it was gone. I convinced myself it was a tree, a trick of the light, my eyes playing games. I didn't look back. I found my campsite just as the last of the daylight disappeared. I practically collapsed by the fire pit and got a flame going with numb fingers. I sat there for hours, eyes scanning the treeline, every little sound making my skin crawl. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I just sat there waiting for the sun. That night, something moved through the camp. I never saw it. I just heard it. Slow footsteps, crunching the frost-hardened dirt. Breathing, not deep, shallow, and uneven, like someone trying not to be heard. It circled the tent once, twice. I held my breath and didn't move. I had my knife in one hand and my hatchet in the other, both inside my sleeping bag. I didn't sleep at all. When morning finally came, I packed everything in record time. I didn't bother with breakfast. I just threw on my pack and started hiking. The trail back felt longer than it should have. I didn't stop to rest. I didn't even stop to drink water. I just kept walking, checking over my shoulder every few minutes. Around mile 5, I saw something in the dirt. Boot prints, fresh, headed in the same direction as me. I bent down to look closer and felt my stomach turn. They were mine, but next to them, just barely overlapping, was another set. Bigger, heavier. I hadn't noticed them on the way in. The last few miles felt like a nightmare. Every sound in the woods made me jump. Every shadow looked like it was moving. When I finally saw the trailhead, my legs almost gave out. My truck was still there. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there for a long time before starting the engine. I didn't look back. I never went back to that lake. I told myself it was just animals, a bad trip, a trick of light and tired nerves. But I know what I felt. I know what I heard. Someone was out there with me, watching, following.